Martin Buber. Tales of the Hasidim. Book 1. The Early Masters. Baruch of Mezbij. The Three Men. An old man once asked the Baal Shem Tov concerning the passage in the Scriptures which relates that Abraham saw three men standing before him. The Holy Book of Splendor says that these were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But how could Abraham see Abraham standing before him? Baruch, the Baal Shem's grandson, who was 3 years old at the time, was present and heard the question. He said, "Grandfather, what a silly thing for this old man to ask. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are, of course, the attributes which, as everyone knows, became the attributes of the fathers: mercy, rigor, and glory." The little sister. After the death of his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, the boy Baruch was taken into the house of Rabbi Pinhas of Keretz. He was very secretive and withdrawn, and even when he was no longer a child, he still would not say a word of teaching. Once, on the day before the Sabbath, Rabbi Pinhas went to the bath with him. When they came home, they drank mead together. As soon as the rabbi saw that the youth had grown light of heart, he asked him to say some words of teaching. Baruch said, "In the Song of Songs it is written, 'We have a little sister.' This refers to wisdom, as it is written in Proverbs, 'Say to wisdom, you are my sister. I have a little wisdom.' And further on in the Song of Songs, we read, 'And she hath no breasts. My little sister wisdom has no breasts from which she can suck. She has no longer a teacher from whom she can receive the teachings.' And still further on it is written, 'What shall we do for our sister in the day when she shall be spoken for? What shall I do with my little wisdom when I have said all there is to say?'" In the house of his father-in-law, after his marriage, Rabbi Baruch lived in the house of his father-in-law. The other two sons-in-law, who were learned men, complained that Baruch conducted himself differently from them and from all the rest of the world besides, that when they sat over their books, he slept, and when he was awake, he busied himself with all manner of foolish things. Finally, the father-in-law decided to take all three of them to the Maggid of Mezrich and put the matter before him. On the way there, they made Baruch sit beside the coachman. When they were about to enter the house, only Baruch was admitted. The others had to wait outside until they were asked to come before the Maggid. He said to them, "Baruch is conducting himself very well, and what seems idle play to you is directed to sublime matters and affects sublime things." On the way home, they gave Baruch the best seat. Preparation. When Rabbi Baruch had burned the leaven on the eve of Passover and scattered the ashes, he said the words prescribed for this and expounded them. "Any kind of leaven which remains in my possession, all that seethes, which I have or have not seen, even though I believe I have looked into myself thoroughly, I have probably not looked thoroughly at all. Which I have burned or not burned, the evil urge within me tries to convince me that I have burned everything. But not until now do I see that I have not burned it. And so I beg of you, God, it shall be null and accounted as the dust of earth." To himself. When Baruch came to those words in the psalm which read, "I will not give sleep to mine eyes, nor slumber to mine eyelids, until I find out a place for the Lord," he stopped and said to himself, "Until I find myself, and make myself a place to be ready for the descending of the divine presence. In that, make us holy." Once, when Rabbi Baruch was saying grace and came to these words, "Our Holy One, the Holy One of Jacob," he said to God in the voice of a child who wants to coax his father, "Our Holy One, make us holy. For you are the Holy One of Jacob. When you wanted to, you made Jacob holy." The two strangers. In the 119th Psalm, the psalmist says to God, "I am a sojourner on the earth. Hide not thy commandments from me." Concerning this verse, Rabbi Baruch said, "He whom life drives into exile, and who comes to a land alien to him, has nothing in common with the people there, and not a soul he can talk to. But if a second stranger appears, even though he may come from quite a different place, the two can confide in each other and live together henceforth and cherish each other. And had they not both been strangers, they would never have known such close companionship. That is what the psalmist means. You, even as I, are a sojourner on earth and have no abiding place for your glory. So do not withdraw from me, but reveal your commandments, that I may become your friend. Blessed be he who spoke. They asked Rabbi Baruch, why do we say, blessed he who spoke, and the world existed, and not, blessed he who created the world? He replied, we praise God because he created our world with the word, and not with the thought. Like other worlds, God judges the Tzaddikim for an evil thought they nurse within them. But how could the rank and file of the people persist if he were to judge them in this way, and not as he does only for an evil thought they have expressed and made effective through words? End quote. With yourself? This is how Rabbi Baruch expounded the words and the sayings of the fathers. And be not wicked by facing yourself only. That is, do not think that you cannot be redeemed. Every man has the vocation of making perfect something in this world. The world has need of every single human being. Put there are those who always sit in their rooms behind closed doors and study, and never leave the house to talk with others. For this they are called wicked. If they talk to others, they would bring to perfection something they are destined to make perfect. That is what the words mean. Be not wicked by facing yourself only. Since you face yourself only, and do not go among people, do not become wicked through solitude. Gifts. When, in saying grace, Rabbi Baruch came to the passage, let us not require gifts of flesh and blood, and not the loan of them, but only your full, open, and holy hand. He repeated these words 3 times, and with great fervor. When he had ended, his daughter asked him, Father, why did you pray so fervently that you might be able to do without the gifts of man? Your only means of subsistence is that the people who come to you give you things of their own accord, to show their gratitude. My daughter, he replied, you must know that there are 3 ways of bringing money to the Tzaddik. Some say to themselves, I'll give him something. I am the kind of man who brings gifts to the Tzaddik. The words, let us not require gifts, refers to these. Others think, if I give something to this devout man, it will profit me hereafter. These want heaven to pay them interest, that is, the loan. But there are some who know, God has put this money in my hand for the Tzaddik, and I am his messenger. These serve the full and open hand. Sweets. On the eve of the Day of Atonement, at the meal which precedes the fast, Rabbi Baruch distributed sweets among his Hasidim at his table, and said, I love you greatly, and whatever good I see in the world, I should like to give you. Keep in mind what is said in the psalm, Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Just taste in the right sense of the word, and you will see. Wherever there is something good, there he is. And he broke into the song, How good is our God, how fair is our lot. Right service. Rabbi Baruch's disciples asked him, when through Moses God commanded Aaron to make the lamps of the candlestick 7, and to light the lamps, the scriptures simply say, and Aaron did so. Rashi thinks that this is said in praise, because he did not deviate from what he was told. How are we to understand this? Is Aaron, appointed by God, to be considered worthy of praise because he did not deviate from God's command? Rabbi Baruch replied, if the righteous man is to serve God in the right way, he must be a man who, no matter what fires he may feel within him, does not allow the flame to burst from the vessel, but performs every tangible action in the manner proper to it. We are told of a holy servant of God who, when he was to fill the lamps in the house of prayer, was so flooded with fervor that he spilled the oil. That is why it must be regarded as praise when it is said of Aaron that, although he served his Maker with the whole strength of his soul, he saw to the candlestick in the way prescribed, and lit the lamps with other in spirit. How we should learn. The disciples of Rabbi Baruch asked him, How can a man ever learn the Talmud adequately? For there we find that Abayi said this, and Rabbah said that. It is just as if Abayi were of one world and Rabbah of quite another. How is it possible to understand and learn both at the same time? The Tzaddik replied, he who wants to understand Abayi's words must link his soul to the soul of Abayi. Then he will learn the true meaning of the words, as Abayi himself utters them. And after that, if he wants to understand Rabbah's words, he must link his soul to the soul of Rabbah. That is what is meant in the Talmud when we read, when a word is spoken in the name of its speaker, his lips move in the grave, and the lips of him who utters the word move like those of the master who is dead. The 50th gate. Without telling his teacher anything of what he was doing, a disciple of Rabbi Baruch's had inquired into the nature of God, and in his thinking had penetrated further and further until he was tangled in doubts, and what had been certain up to this time became uncertain. When Rabbi Baruch noticed that the young man no longer came to him as usual, he went to the city where he lived, entered his room unexpectedly, and said to him, I know what is hidden in your heart. You have passed through the 50 gates of reason. You begin with a question and think up an answer, and the first gate opens, and to a new question. And again you plummet. Find the solution. Fling open the second gate and look into a new question. On and on like this, deeper and deeper, until you have forced open the 50th gate. There you stare at a question whose answer no man has ever found. For if there were one who knew it, there would no longer be freedom of choice. But if you dare to probe still further, you plunge into the abyss. So I should go back all the way to the very beginning? Cried the disciple. If you turn, you will not be going back, said Rabbi Baruch. You will be standing beyond the last gate. You will stand in faith. Thanking in advance. On a certain eve of the Sabbath, Rabbi Baruch went back and forth in his house, and, as always, first gave the greeting of peace to the angels of peace, and then said the prayer, Lord of the worlds, Lord of all souls, Lord of peace, until he came to the words, I offer thanks to you, O Lord my God, and God of my fathers, for all the grace you have done unto me, and which you will do unto me in the future. Here he stopped and was silent for a time. Then he said, Why should I give thanks for future grace? Whenever grace is done unto me, that is when I shall offer thanks. But instantly he replied to himself, Perhaps a time will come when you do a grace unto me, and I shall not be able to offer the thanks which are your due. That is why I must do it now. And he burst into tears. Rabbi Moshe of Savran, his disciple, had stood in a corner of the room unnoticed and heard his master's words. Now, when he saw him weep, he came forward and said, Why do you weep? Your question was good, and your answer was good. Rabbi Baruch said, I wept because suddenly I thought, For what offense shall I be punished by not being able to offer thanks? The great work. Rabbi Baruch said, Elijah's great work was not that he performed miracles, but that when fire fell from heaven, the people did not speak of miracles, but all cried, The Lord is God. Everything is wonder. They asked Rabbi Baruch, in the hymn, God is called Creator of remedies, awful in praises, Lord of wonders. Why? Why should remedies stand next to wonders and even precede them? He answered, God does not want to be praised as the Lord of supernatural miracles. And so here, through the mention of remedies, nature is introduced and put first. But the truth is that everything is a miracle and wonder. Medicine. Once Rabbi Baruch went to the city and bought medicine for his sick daughter. The servant set it on the windowsill of his room in the inn. Rabbi Baruch went up and down, looked at the little bottles, and said, If it is God's will that my daughter Rizel recover, she needs no medicine. But if God made his miraculous power manifest to all eyes, then no one would, any longer, have freedom of choice. Everyone would know. But God wanted men to have a choice, so he cloaked his doing in the courses of nature. That is why he created healing herbs. Then he walked up and down the room again and asked, "But why does one give poisons to the sick?" And answered, "The sparks that fell from the primeval iniquity of the worlds into the shells and penetrated the stuff of stones, plants, and animals all ascend back to their source through the sanctification of the devout who work at them, use them, and consume them in holiness. But how shall those sparks that fell into bitter poisons and poisonous herbs be redeemed? That they might not remain in exile, God appointed them for the sick, to each the carriers of the sparks, which belong to the root of his soul. Thus the sick are themselves physicians who heal the poisons." Apparition. When Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, whose son was the husband of Rabbi Baruch's daughter, once came to visit the rabbi and was on the very threshold of his room, he started back and closed the door. After a while, the same thing recurred. On being questioned, Rabbi Shlomo said, "He is standing at the window and looking out, but beside him stands the holy Baal Shem Tov and is caressing his hair." The argument. Rabbi Moshe of Ludmir, the son of Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, once called on Rabbi Baruch together with his younger son. When they entered the room, they saw and heard the Tzaddik arguing with his wife. He paid no attention to his guests. The boy was disturbed because his father was not shown the honor due to him. When Rabbi Moshe observed this, he said, "My son, believe me, what you have just heard was an argument between God and his presence concerning the lot of the world." Fine words. One Sabbath, a learned man who was a guest at Rabbi Baruch's table said to him, "Now let us hear the teachings from you, Rabbi. You speak so well." "Rather than speak so well," said the grandson of the Baal Shem, "I should be stricken dumb." To a bridegroom. Rabbi Baruch said this to a bridegroom before he stepped under the wedding canopy. "It is written, 'And as the bridegroom rejoiceth over the bride, so shall thy God rejoice over thee. In you, bridegroom, God shall rejoice. The godlike part of you shall rejoice over the bride." Sabbath joy. Once Rabbi Baruch was entertaining a distinguished guest from the land of Israel. He was one of those who are forever mourning for Zion and Jerusalem and cannot forget their sorrow for a single second. On the eve of the Sabbath, the rabbi sang, "He who sanctifies the seventh day," in his usual manner. When he came to the words, "Beloved of the Lord, you who await the rebuilding of Ariel," he looked up and saw his guest sitting there as gloomy and sad as always. Then he interrupted himself and vehemently and joyfully shouted in the very face of the startled man, "Beloved of the Lord, you who await the rebuilding of Ariel, on this holy day of the Sabbath, be joyful and happy." After this, he sang the song on to the end. Forgetting. A learned man from Lithuania who was proud of his knowledge was in the habit of interrupting the sermons of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev with all manner of hair-splitting objections. Time after time, the Tzaddik invited him to visit him at his home for discussions of this kind, but the Lithuanian did not come, but continued to appear in the house of prayer and interrupted the rabbi again and again. Rabbi Baruch was told of this. "If he comes to me," he said, "he will not be able to say anything at all." These words were reported to the learned man. "What is the rabbi specially versed in?" he asked. "In the Book of Splendor," was the answer. So he selected a difficult passage in the Book of Splendor and went to Mezbij to ask Rabbi Baruch about it. When he came into the room, he saw the Book of Splendor lying on the desk and open to the very passage he had in mind. "What an odd coincidence," he thought to himself, and immediately began to cast about for another difficult passage that might serve to embarrass the rabbi. But the Tzaddik anticipated him. "Are you well versed in the Talmud?" he asked. "Certainly I am well versed in it," the other replied and laughed. "In the Talmud," said Rabbi Baruch, "it is said that when the child is in the mother's womb, a light is kindled above his head, and he learns the entire Torah, but that when his appointed time to issue forth into the air of earth has come, an angel strikes him on the mouth, and thereupon he forgets everything. How are we to interpret this? Why should he learn everything? only to forget it. The Lithuanian was silent. Rabbi Baruch continued, I shall answer the question myself. At first glance, it is not clear why God created forgetfulness. But the meaning of it is this: if there were no forgetting, man would incessantly think of his death. He would build no house, he would launch on no enterprise. That is why God planted forgetting within him. And so one angel is ordered to teach the child in such a way that it will not forget anything. And the second angel is ordered to strike him on the mouth and make him forget. But occasionally he fails to do this, and then I replace him. And now it is your turn. Recite the whole passage to me. The man from Lithuania tried to speak, but he stammered and could not utter a single word. He left the rabbi's house and had forgotten everything. He was an ignorant man. After that, he became a servant in the house of prayer in Berdichev. Blessing of the moon. In a certain month of winter, one dark and cloudy night followed upon the other. The moon was hidden, and Rabbi Baruch could not say the blessing of the moon. On the last night of those set aside for this, he sent someone out to look at the sky, time after time. But again and again, he was told that it was dark as pitch, and the snow was falling thick and fast. Finally, he said, if things were with me as they should be, the moon would surely do me a favor, so I ought to do penance. But because I am no longer strong enough to do it, I must at least penitently confess my sins. And this penitent confession broke from his lips with such force that all who were there with him were shaken. A great shudder pulsed through their hearts, and they turned to God. Then someone came and reported, it isn't snowing anymore, you can see a little light. The rabbi put on his coat and went out. The clouds had scattered. Among the shining stars shone the moon, and he spoke the blessing. Hide and seek. Rabbi Baruch's grandson, Yehiel, was once playing hide and seek with another boy. He hid himself well and waited for his playmate to find him. When he had waited for a long time, he came out of his hiding place, but the other was nowhere to be seen. Now Yehiel realized that he had not looked for him from the very beginning. This made him cry, and crying he ran to his grandfather and complained of his faithless friend. Then tears brimmed in Rabbi Baruch's eyes, and he said, God says the same thing. I hide, but no one wants to seek me. The two wicks. Rabbi Baruch's other grandchild, young Israel, made a habit of crying aloud while he prayed. Once his grandfather said to him, my son, do you recall the difference between a wick of cotton and a wick of flax? One burns quietly, and the other sputters. Believe me, a single true gesture, even if it be only that of the small toe, is enough. The twofold world. Rabbi Baruch once said, what a good and bright world this is if we do not lose our hearts to it, but what a dark world if we do. Dov Ber of Mezrich, the great Maggid. The family tree. When Rabbi Ber was 5 years old, a fire broke out in his father's house. Hearing his mother grieve and cry about this, he asked her, Mother, do we have to be so unhappy because we have lost a house? I am not grieving for the house, she said, but for our family tree, which burned up. It began with Rabbi Yohanan, the sandal maker, the master in the Talmud. And what does that matter? Exclaimed the boy. I shall get you a new family tree which begins with me. The curse. When Rabbi Ber was young, he and his wife lived in great poverty. They inhabited a ramshackle house beyond the city limits because they did not have to pay rent for it. And here the woman brought her son into the world. Up to this time she had not complained. But when the midwife asked for money to buy chamomile tea for the child, and she hadn't a penny to give her, she moaned, This is how his service provides for us. The Maggid heard these words and said to her, Now I shall go outside and curse Israel, because they leave us to our misery. He went out, stood in front of the door, raised his eyes to heaven and cried, O children of Israel, may abundant blessings come upon you. Then he went back into the room. When he heard his wife moan a second time, he said to her, Now I shall really curse them. Once more he went out, lifted his head, and cried, Let all happiness come to the children of Israel. but they shall give their money to thorn bushes and stones. The sigh. Silently his wife held the hungry child. It was too weak to cry. Then, for the first time, the Maggid sighed. Instantly, the answer came. A voice said to him, "You have lost your share in the coming world." "Well then," he said, "the reward has been done away with. Now I can begin to serve in good earnest." Punishment. When the Maggid realized that he had become known to the world, he begged God to tell him what sin of his had brought this guilt upon him. His reception. Rabbi Ber was a keen scholar, equally versed in the intricacies of the Gemara and the depths of the Kabbalah. Time and again he had heard about the Baal Shem, and finally decided to go to him in order to see for himself if his wisdom really justified his great reputation. When he reached the master's house and stood before him, he greeted him, and then, without even looking at him properly, waited for teachings to issue from his lips that he might examine and weigh them. But the Baal Shem only told him that once he had driven through the wilderness for days and lacked bread to feed his coachman, then a peasant happened along and sold him bread. After this, he dismissed his guest. The following evening, the Maggid again went to the Baal Shem and thought that now surely he would hear something of his teachings. But all Rabbi Israel told him was that once, while he was on the road, he had had no hay for his horses, and a farmer had come and fed the animals. The Maggid did not know what to make of these stories. He was quite certain that it was useless for him to wait for this man to utter words of wisdom. When he returned to his inn, he ordered his servant to prepare for the homeward journey. They would start as soon as the moon had scattered the clouds. Around midnight it grew light. Then a man came from the Baal Shem with the message that Rabbi Ber was to come to him that very hour. He went at once. The Baal Shem received him in his room. "Are you versed in the Kabbalah?" he asked. The Maggid said he was. "Take this book, the Tree of Life. Open it and read." The Maggid read. "Now think," he thought. "Expound." He expounded the passage which dealt with the nature of angels. "You have no true knowledge," said the Baal Shem. "Get up." The Maggid rose. The Baal Shem stood in front of him and recited the passage. Then, before the eyes of Rabbi Ber, the room went up in flame, and through the blaze he heard the surging of angels until his senses forsook him. When he awoke, the room was as it had been when he entered it. The Baal Shem stood opposite him and said, "You expounded correctly, but you have no true knowledge, because there is no soul in what you know." Rabbi Ber went back to the inn, told his servant to go home, and stayed in Mezbij, the town of the Baal Shem. The sign. Once, at parting, the Baal Shem blessed his disciple. Then he bowed his own head to receive the blessing from him. Rabbi Ber drew back, but the Baal Shem took his hand and laid it on his head. The succession. Before the Baal Shem died, his disciples asked him who was to be their master in his stead. He said, "Whoever can teach you how pride can be broken shall be my successor." After the Baal Shem's death, they first put the question to Rabbi Ber, "How can pride be broken?" He replied, "Pride belongs to God. As it is written, 'The Lord reigneth. He is clothed in pride.' That is why no counsel can be given on how to break pride. We must struggle with it all the days of our life." Then the disciples knew that it was he who was the Baal Shem's successor. The visit. Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polnoi was the other of the two most distinguished disciples of the Baal Shem who fell heir to his work. It was he who wrote down his master's teachings. After the Baal Shem's death, he lived in Mezrich for a time, and during this period the Maggid asked him to be his guest over the Sabbath. The Rabbi of Polnoi said, "On the Sabbath I act like any house father. I lie down after dining. I do not extend the dinner hour as you who have many disciples, and say Torah at table." "On the Sabbath," answered the Maggid, "my disciples and I shall stay in 2 rooms which lie across the courtyard and leave the house to you, so that you can do just as you would in your own home." So the Rabbi of Polnoi and his disciple Rabbi Moshe, who had accompanied him on his trip, remained in the house. On the eve of the Sabbath they ate together, and then Rabbi Jacob Joseph went to sleep. His disciple wanted very much to sit at the Maggid's table, for he knew him for the leader of his generation. But he feared his teacher might wake up and notice his absence. After the meal on the evening of the Sabbath, the holy third meal, the rabbi of Polnoi said to his disciple, "Let us go to the Maggid's table and listen in a little." While they crossed the court, they heard the Maggid's voice intoning the teachings, but when they reached his door, it ceased. Rabbi Jacob Joseph went back into the court, and again he heard the Maggid speak. Once more he turned to the door. Once more he stood on the threshold. Once more all was silent within. When this happened a third time, the rabbi of Polnoi walked back and forth in the court, his hands pressed to his heart, and said, "What can we do?" On the day our master died, the divine presence packed her knapsack and journeyed to Mezrich. He did not try to go to the Maggid's table again. When the Sabbath was over, he made his farewells in cordial words and went home with his disciple. Palm and cedar. The righteous Tzaddik shall flourish like the palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Concerning this verse in the psalm, the Maggid of Mezrich said, "There are two kinds of Tzaddikim. Some spend their time on mankind. They teach them and take trouble about them. Others concern themselves only with the teachings themselves. The first bear nourishing fruit, like the date palm. The second are like the cedar, lofty and unfruitful." Nearness. A disciple told, "Whenever we rode to our teacher, the moment we were within the limits of the town, all our desires were fulfilled. And if anyone happened to have a wish left, this was satisfied as soon as he entered the house of the Maggid. But if there was one among us whose soul was still churned up with wanting, he was at peace when he looked into the face of the Maggid." Effect. A number of disciples once went to the Maggid. "We are not going to stay," they said to one another. "We only want to look into his face." They told the coachman to wait in front of the house. The Maggid at once told them a story which consisted of 24 words. They listened, bade him farewell, and said to the coachman, "Drive on slowly, we'll catch up with you." They walked behind the carriage and talked about the story they had heard. For the rest of that day and the whole of the night, they walked after the carriage. At dawn, the coachman stopped, looked back, and said crossly, "Isn't it bad enough that yesterday you forgot the afternoon and the evening prayer? Are you going to skip the morning prayer too?" He had to repeat this 4 times before they even heard him. In the Maggid's house. Rabbi Shneur Zalman used to say, "What of prophecies? What of miracles? In the house of my teacher, the Holy Maggid, you drew up Holy Spirit by the bucketful, and miracles lay around under the benches, only that no one had the time to pick them up." Teaching. In a certain year, on the eve of Shavuot, the feast of the Revelation, the rabbi of Rizhin sat at his table and said no word of the teachings to his disciples, as he usually did at this hour. He was silent and wept. It was the same the second evening of the feast. But after grace he said, "Many a time, when my ancestor, the Holy Maggid, taught at table, his disciples discussed what their teacher had said on the way home, and each quoted him differently, and each was positive he had heard it in this and no other way, and what they said was quite contradictory. There was no possibility of clearing up the matter, because when they went to the Maggid and asked him, he only repeated the traditional saying, 'Both these and those are words of the living God.' But when the disciples thought it over, they understood the meaning of the contradiction. For at the source, the Torah is one. In the worlds, her face is 70-fold. If, however, a man looks intently at one of these faces, he no longer has need of words or of teachings, for the features of that eternal face speak to him." In exile. The Maggid of Mezrich said, "Now, in exile, the Holy Spirit comes upon us more easily than at the time the temple was still standing. A king was driven from his realm and forced to become a wayfarer. When, in the course of his wanderings, he came to the house of poor people, where he was given modest food and shelter, but received as a king, his heart grew light, and he chatted with his host as intimately as he had done at court with those who were closest to him. Now that he is in exile, God does the same. God's fatherhood. Concerning the verse in the Scriptures, "But from thence ye will seek the Lord thy God, and thou shalt find him," the Maggid of Mezrich said, "You must cry to God and call him Father until he becomes your Father." The between stage. The Maggid of Mezrich said, "Nothing in the world can change from one reality into another, unless it first turns into nothing, that is, into the reality of the between stage. In that stage it is nothing and no one can grasp it, for it has reached the rung of nothingness, just as before creation. And then it is made into a new creature, from the egg to the chick. The moment when the egg is no more, and the chick is not yet, is nothingness. And philosophy terms this the primal state which no one can grasp, because it is a force which precedes creation. It is called chaos. It is the same with the sprouting seed. It does not begin to sprout until the seed disintegrates in the earth, and the quality of seeddom is destroyed, in order that it may attain to nothingness, which is the rung before creation. And this rung is called wisdom, that is to say, a thought which cannot be made manifest. Then this thought gives rise to creation, as it is written, "In wisdom hast thou made them all." The last miracle. The Maggid of Mezrich said, "The creation of heaven and earth is the unfolding of something out of nothing, the descent from above to below. But the Tzaddikim who in their work disengage themselves from what is bodily and do nothing but think about God, actually see and understand and imagine the universe as it was in the state of nothingness before creation. They change the something back into the nothing. This is more miraculous, to begin from the lower state. As it is said in the Talmud, greater than the first miracle is the last." The strong thief. The Maggid of Mezrich said, "Every lock has its key which is fitted to it and opens it, but there are strong thieves who know how to open without keys. They break the lock. So every mystery in the world can be unriddled by the particular kind of meditation fitted to it. But God loves the thief who breaks the lock open. I mean the man who breaks his heart for God." The 10 principles. Said the Maggid to Rabbi Zusia, his disciple, "I cannot teach you the 10 principles of service, but a little child and a thief can show you what they are. From the child, you can learn 3 things. He is merry for no particular reason. Never for a moment is he idle. When he needs something, he demands it vigorously. The thief can instruct you in 7 things. He does his service by night. If he does not finish what he has set out to do in one night, he devotes the next night to it. He and those who work with him love one another. He risks his life for slight gains. What he takes has so little value for him that he gives it up for a very small coin. He endures blows and hardship, and it matters nothing to him. He likes his trade and would not exchange it for any other." The Rabbi and the Angel. The first time it was on a Friday that Rabbi Shmelka, the Rav of Nikolsburg, and his brother Rabbi Pinhas, the Rav of Frankfurt on the Main, went to the house of the great Maggid. They were deeply disappointed. They had expected a long and elaborate welcome, but he dismissed them after a brief greeting and devoted himself to preparing for another, a more distinguished guest, the Sabbath. At the 3 Sabbath meals, they were all agog to hear learned and intricate speeches. The Maggid said only a few words at each, and without a great show of intellect. At the 3rd, in particular, he did not speak at all like a teacher to his disciples, who are avid to learn, but like a good father, united with his sons at a meal only a little more solemn than usual. This was why they took leave of Rabbi Ber the very next day, and then went to the house of study to bid his disciples goodbye. There they saw one whom they had not met, Rabbi Zusia. When they entered, he looked at them for a long time, first at one, then at the other. Finally, he fixed his eyes on the floor and said without greeting or any transitional phrase, Malachi says, "For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the teaching from his mouth, for he is an angel of the Lord of hosts." Our sages expounded this as follows: If the rabbi resembles an angel, you shall seek the teachings from his lips. How are we to understand this? Has any one of us ever seen an angel so that we could compare the rabbi with him? But that is just what is meant. You have never seen an angel, yet if he stood before you, you would not ask him questions, or examine him, or demand a sign, but believe and know he was an angel. It is the same with the true Tzaddik. If there is someone who makes you feel such as this from his lips, you shall seek the teachings. When Rabbi Zusha had ended, the brothers, in their hearts, had already joined the disciples of the Maggid. The ball. Before the Maggid began to teach the two brothers, Shmelka and Pinhas, he told them how to conduct themselves throughout the day, from the moment of waking to falling asleep. His directions took into account all their habits, confirming them or modifying them, as though he knew the whole of their lives. In closing, he said, "And before you lie down at night, you add up everything you have done during the day, and when a man calculates his hours and sees that he has not wasted a moment in idleness, when his heart beats high with pride, then up in heaven they take all his good works, crush them into a ball, and hurl it down into the abyss." Body and soul. When Rabbi Shmelka returned from his first trip to the great Maggid, and they asked him what his experience had been, he replied, "Up to that time I had mortified my body so that it might endure the soul. But now I have seen and learned that the soul can endure the body and need not separate from it. This is what we are told in the Holy Torah, and I will set my abiding presence among you, and my soul shall not abhor you, for the soul shall not abhor the body." Its own place. Once Rabbi Michal of Zlotchov took his young son Yitzchak on a visit to the great Maggid. The Maggid left the room for a short time, and while he was absent, the boy picked up a snuff box lying on the table, looked at it from every angle, and put it back again. The moment the Maggid crossed the threshold, he looked at Yitzchak and said to him, "Everything has its own place. Every change of place has a meaning. If one does not know, one should not do." To say Torah and to be Torah. Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, the hidden Tzaddik who wandered over the earth, following the course of rivers, in order to redeem the souls of the living and the dead, said this: "I did not go to the Maggid in order to hear Torah from him, but to see how he unlaces his felt shoes and laces them up again." How to say Torah. The Maggid once said to his disciples, "I shall teach you the best way to say Torah. You must cease to be aware of yourselves. You must be nothing but an ear which hears what the universe of the word is constantly saying within you. The moment you start hearing what you yourself are saying, you must stop." The Stoker's discussion. The great Maggid accepted only chosen men as his disciples. Of these he said that they were noble tapers, which need only to be lit to burn with a pure flame. Some scholars he rejected because, so he said, his way was not suited to them. But several young men who were not yet considered worthy of being his disciples remained with him and performed services for him and his disciples. They went by the name of Stokers because tending the stoves was part of their duties. One night, as he was about to fall asleep, one of the disciples, Shneur Zalman, the later Rav of northern White Russia, heard three of these young men working at a stove in the adjoining room. They were talking about the sacrifice of Isaac. One of them said, "Why do people make such a great to-do about Abraham? Who would not do as he did if God himself commanded it? Just think of all those who threw away their lives without such a command, solely to sanctify the name. What do you think of it?" The other said, "I see it this way. The children of Israel have within them the heritage of the Holy Fathers, and so it is no particular virtue for them to give up what they treasure most. But Abraham was the son of a worshipper of idols." The first of the three Stokers answered, "What did that matter at the moment that God himself, spoke to him?" Now the second said, "You must not forget that he rose at early dawn and immediately prepared for the journey without delaying at home with his son even for an hour." The first rejected this reason also. "If God spoke to me now," he said, "I should not wait until morning. I should do his bidding right in the middle of the night." Then the third, who had been silent up to this time, said, "In the scriptures it is written, 'For now I know,' and further on, 'Thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only one, from me.'" You might think that the words "from me" were unnecessary, but we learn something just from them, that when the angel held back his hand, Abraham did not rejoice because Isaac was to live, but still, even at this moment, rejoiced more than ever that the will of God was fulfilled by him. That is why it is written, "For now I know now," when the angel had already arrested Abraham's hand. The first of the three stokers did not reply, and the two others were also silent. All Rabbi Shneur Zalman heard was the crackling of the faggots and the hiss of the flames. How to become spiritual. In the days of the great Maggid, a well-to-do merchant who refused to have anything to do with Hasidic teachings lived in Mezrich. His wife took care of the shop. He himself spent only 2 hours a day in it. The rest of the time he sat over his books in the house of study. One Friday morning, he saw 2 young men there whom he did not know. He asked them where they were from and why they had come, and was told they had journeyed a great distance to see and hear the great Maggid. Then he decided that for once he too would go to his house. He did not want to sacrifice any of his study time for this, so he did not go to his shop on that day. The Maggid's radiant face affected him so strongly that from then on he went to his home more and more frequently, and ended up attaching himself to him altogether. From this time on, he had one business failure after another, until he was quite poor. He complained to the Maggid that this had happened to him since he had become his disciple. The Maggid answered, "You know what our sages say, 'He who wants to grow wise, let him go south. He who wants to grow rich, let him go north.' Now what shall one do who wants to grow both rich and wise?" The man did not know what to reply. The Maggid continued, "He who thinks nothing at all of himself and makes himself nothing grows spiritual, and spirit does not occupy space. He can be north and south at the same time." These words moved the merchant's heart, and he cried out, "Then my fate is sealed." "No, no," said the Maggid. "You have already begun." The list of sins. During his stay in Mezrich, the Rav of Kolbishov saw an old man come to the great Maggid and ask him to impose penance on him for his sins. "Go home," said the Maggid. "Write all your sins down on a slip of paper and bring it to me." When the man brought him the list, he merely glanced at it. Then he said, "Go home, all is well." But later the Rav observed that Rabbi Ber read the list and laughed at every line. This annoyed him. How could anyone laugh at sins? For years he could not forget the incident, until once he heard someone quote a saying of the Baal Shem. "It is well known that no one commits a sin unless the spirit of folly possesses him. But what does the sage do if a fool comes to him? He laughs at all this folly, and while he laughs, a breath of gentleness is wafted through the world. What was rigid thaws, and what was a burden becomes light." The Rav reflected. In his soul, he said, "Now I understand the laughter of the holy Maggid." From where? They tell, a disciple of the Gaon of Vilna saw his dead father appear to him every night in a dream and ask him to give up his faith and become a Christian. Since Vilna was far away from where he lived, and Mezrich near, he decided to ask the great Maggid for counsel and aid, in spite of the fact that a serious quarrel had broken out between the two schools. "Open your father's grave," said the Maggid. "In it you will find 2 pieces of wood lying so that they form a cross. Take them out, and you will soon have peace again." And everything was just as the Maggid had said. When the man went to Vilna, years later, he told the whole matter to his teacher. The Gaon said, "This is touched on in the Palestinian Talmud, but it is astonishing that the Maggid of Mezrich understood the passage. When, after a time, the man visited Rabbi Ber, he repeated the Gaon's words to him. 'Your teacher,' said the Maggid, 'knows it from the Palestinian Talmud, and I know it from where that work knows it.'" Failure. Once the Maggid concentrated all the force of his being on the coming of redemption. Then a voice asked from heaven, "Who is trying to hasten the end, and what does he consider himself?" The Maggid replied, "I am the leader of my generation, and it is my duty to use all my strength for that purpose." Again the voice asked a question, "How can you prove this?" "My holy congregation," said the Maggid, "will rise and testify for me." "Let them rise!" cried the voice. Then Rabbi Bear went to his disciples and said, "Is it true that I am the leader of my generation?" But all were silent. He repeated his question, and still no one said, "It is true." Not until after he had left them did the numbness leave their minds and tongues, and they were startled at themselves. Conjuring. During the last years of the Maggid's life, the Mitnagdim were so hostile to the Hasidim that they came to regard them as the builders of the Tower of Babel, reborn, and as such banned them, forbade association with them, marriage, eating of their bread, and drinking of their wine. The disciples of the Maggid complained of this on each of the 3 meals of the Sabbath, but all 3 times he was silent, as though he had not heard. So, at the close of the Sabbath, his disciples, 10 in number, formed a congregation of their own and opened the house of prayer. There, with secret rites, they turned the ban back on those who had banned them. By the 3rd hour after midnight, the thing was done, and they went to the room where they slept. Around the 4th hour, they heard the Maggid's crutches drag over the floor. He had been using them for several years because of his weak feet. They rose, washed their hands, and stood before their master. He said, "Children, what have you done?" They replied, "We no longer had the strength to endure it." He said, "You have done a foolish thing, and you have forfeited your head." In that very year, the great Maggid died. At the pond. After the Maggid's death, his disciples came together and talked about the things he had done. When it was Rabbi Shneur Zalman's turn, he asked them, "Do you know why our master went to the pond every day at dawn and stayed there for a little while before coming home again?" They did not know why. Rabbi Zalman continued, "He was learning the song with which the frogs praise God. It takes a very long time to learn that song." The left foot. It is known that the great Maggid used crutches. Many years after his death, his great disciple, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, once heard his own disciples arguing about who should be called the Tzaddik of the generation. "What is there to argue about?" he cried. "The Tzaddik of the generation is my master, the holy Maggid of Mezrich, and none other. Let us make man in our image is written about him, for he was a perfect man." You will object and say, "How is that possible? His feet were crippled." But I tell you, he was perfect, and you know what is said of the perfect man, that with each of his limbs he moves all the worlds, as it is written in the Book of Splendor. Mercy, that is the right arm, rigor is the left. That was why he dragged his left foot. He offered it up, lest he waken rigor within the world. From the lookout of heaven. At a time of great anguish for Israel, Rabbi Elimelech brooded more and more on his griefs. Then his dead master, the Maggid of Mezrich, appeared to him. Rabbi Elimelech cried out, "Why are you silent in such dreadful need?" He answered, "In heaven, we see that all that seems evil to you is a work of mercy." Abraham, the angel. The mothers. They tell, in the days when the great Maggid was still poor and unrecognized, it happened on a winter evening that his wife set out for the bath, for her monthly purification. But she was caught in a savage snowstorm, lost her way, and groped about for a long time, until finally, at dead of night, she found the bath. When she knocked at the door, the bathmaster called to her from within, grumbled that she had waked him from his sleep, and refused to let her in. The woman stood outside in the icy night, but she would not go away. At midnight, she heard carriage bells and the snorting of horses. A fine carriage drove up to the bathhouse. 4 women got out. They knocked at the door and called. The bathmaster came with a light, looked at the women with awe, and admitted them. But before they entered, they took the wife of the Maggid between them. They all bathed together. When they had done, They asked her into their carriage and drove her home. She got out and looked around, but the carriage was gone. Softly she entered the room. "So, you bathed with the mothers," the Maggid said. That night she conceived her son Abraham. Origin. They say that the great Maggid had purified and unified his body and spirit so utterly that his body was as his spirit, and his spirit was as his body. Therefore, in the hour he begot his son, a pure spirit from the world of angels entered his wife's womb, and from there it was born for a brief space into the world of man. The face. Sometimes Rabbi Abraham looked so great and awe-inspiring that men could not bear to look at him. One Tzaddik, who was performing some holy rite, did look at him and forgot whether or not he had said the blessing. On his return home, he refused both food and drink. Another marshaled his courage 4 whole weeks, but when he crossed the threshold and saw Rabbi Abraham binding on his phylacteries, he trembled and turned away, and did not again venture into his presence. Baruch and Ephraim, the grandsons of the Baal Shem Tov, once said to each other, "Why do you suppose people call the son of the Maggid an angel? Let us have a look at him." But when they reached the street in which he lived, and saw Rabbi Abraham's face in the window, they fled in such haste that Ephraim dropped his book of Psalms. Marriage. When Rabbi Abraham, the angel, entered the room on his wedding night, his face was more awe-inspiring than ever before, and his lips uttered dark sounds of lament. His appearance and his voice terrified the bride to the secret core of her being, and she fell fainting to the ground. Until morning she lay in a fever. When he entered the room on the following night, his wife's heart filled with heroic strength, and she endured his terrible greatness. Rabbi Abraham begot 2 sons. After that he lived apart as before. His wife's dream. His wife had a dream. She saw a vast hall, and in it thrones, set in a semicircle. On each throne sat one of the great, and one said, "Let us summon him home." The others nodded in chorus. The woman came forward. She stood before the great on the thrones and pleaded and fought for her husband's life on earth. Her words burned with intensity. The great listened in silence. Finally one said, "Give him to her for 12 earthly years." The others nodded in chorus. The dream melted away. When the Maggid said the morning greeting, he laid his hands on the head of his son's wife. Anniversary. On the eve of the 9th of Av, the day of the burning of the temple, the men sat on the floor of the dark room of prayer, mourning the destroyed sanctuary, and the reader began, "How doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people?" Rabbi Abraham, the angel, sitting among the men, cried aloud, "How?" and fell silent, his head between his knees. The reader ended the lament. Everyone went home. Rabbi Abraham remained, his head between his knees. They found him in the same position the following day, and he did not rise until he had experienced the destruction to the very end. Strategic retreat. Rabbi Abraham said, "I have learned a new form of service from the wars of Frederick, King of Prussia. It is not necessary to approach the enemy in order to attack him. In fleeing from him, it is possible to circumvent him as he advances and fall on him from the rear until he is forced to surrender. What is needed is not to strike straight at evil, but to withdraw to the sources of divine power, and from there to circle around evil, bend it, and transform it into its opposite." Inheritance. It is told, after his death, the Maggid appeared to his son, and invoking the commandment to honor one's parents, ordered him to give up his life of perfect seclusion. For whoever walks away such as this is in danger. Abraham replied, "I do not recognize a father in the flesh. I recognize only one merciful Father of all that lives." "You accepted your inheritance," said the Maggid. "With that you recognized me as your father even after my death." "I renounce my father's inheritance," cried Rabbi Abraham, the angel. At that very moment, fire broke out in the house and consumed the few small things the Maggid had left his son, but nothing besides. The white pekeshe. A short time after the fire, in which the clothing and utensils the Maggid had left his son were burned, Rabbi Abraham's brother-in-law made him a present of a robe of white silk the Maggid had worn on high holidays, the famous white pekeshe. On the eve of the Day of Atonement, Abraham put it on to honor his father. The lights in the house of prayer had already been lit. With a fervent gesture, the Tzaddik leaned over to one of them. The robe caught fire. They snatched it from his body. With a long look of understanding, he watched it crumble to ash. The mountain. Once Rabbi Abraham visited his father-in-law in Kremnitz. The most distinguished members of the congregation assembled to welcome the holy man. But he turned his back on them and looked out of the window at the mountain at whose foot the city lay. Among those waiting for him was a man very much aware of his own learning and intent on his own importance. He said impatiently, "Why do you keep staring at the mountain? Have you never seen anything like it before?" The rabbi answered, "I look and am amazed to see how such a lump of earth made much of itself, until it grew into a tall mountain." Without God, Rabbi Abraham said, "Lord of the world, if it were possible to imagine a fraction of a second without your influence and providence, of what avail to us were this world, and of what avail to us were that other world? Of what avail to us were the coming of the Messiah, and of what avail to us the resurrection of the dead? What would there be to delight in all of this, and what would it be there for?" The full stature. Rabbi Abraham said, "We say in our prayers, 'Every stature shall bow before thee.' When man reaches the highest rung, when he reaches his full stature, only then does he become truly humble in his own eyes and knows what it is to bow before you." End quote. The other dream. In the night after the 7 days of mourning for Rabbi Abraham, his wife had a dream. She saw a vast hall, and in it thrones, set in a semicircle. On each throne sat one of the great. A door opened, and one who looked like those others entered. It was Abraham, her husband. He said, "Friends, my wife bears me a grudge because in my earthly life I lived apart from her. She is right, and therefore I must obtain her forgiveness." His wife cried out, "With all my heart I forgive you," and awoke comforted. Sanctified. Rabbi Israel of Rizhin told, a few years after the death of Rabbi Abraham, the angel, his widow, my blessed grandmother, received an offer of marriage from the great Tzaddik Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl. But the angel appeared to him in a dream and looked at him threateningly, so he let her be. My blessed grandmother lived in want. When the rabbi of Chernobyl had taken her son, my father, into his house, she went to the land of Israel. She told no one there who she was. She took in washing and supported herself with the money she got for this. She died in the land of Israel. If only someone could tell me where she lies buried. Pinchas of Koretz and his school. The Black Melamed. In his young years, Rabbi Pinchas earned his livelihood as a melamed, that is, as a teacher of children, in Koretz, where he was generally known as the Black Melamed. He concealed his true nature from everybody. The only one who knew about him was the Rav of Koretz. This Rav had a special room in the bathhouse and his own bath. Rabbi Pinchas asked his permission to bathe there any time he pleased, day or night, and the Rav told the bathmaster to admit him at any hour whatsoever. Once Rabbi Pinchas came after midnight and woke up the bathmaster, but he refused to open because the day before he had bought some geese and was keeping them in just that room overnight. But the Black Melamed would not take no for an answer. He knocked a few shingles out of the roof, climbed through the opening, dipped into the bath, and was going out the same way when a piece of the wall broke off and struck him on the head with such force that he lost his footing and fell. He lay on the ground unconscious for several hours. In the morning, people found him and thought he was dead. When the Rav heard of it, he said no one must touch him. He himself, however, did not go there, but to the house of prayer, and prayed, "Lord of the world, keep him alive. Lord of the world, keep this Tzaddik alive, for your own sake." Then he went to the place where Pinhas was still lying motionless. He shook him and said, "Pinhasel, get up, go, teach your pupils. Remember, you are a hired man who has his day's work to do." And Rabbi Pinhas got up and went to his school. Bloodletting. When Rabbi Pinhas visited the Baal Shem for the first time, his host looked at him for quite a while and then sent for the doctor to let his guests blood. But before he began, the Baal Shem warned him to be careful to do it right. For, so he said, "That is holy blood, preserved ever since the 6 days of creation. If you are not quite sure your hand is steady," he added jestingly, "better tap my vein." When the citron came. When the Baal Shem Tov lay dying, his disciple, Rabbi David of Ostrog, came to him and said, "Rabbi, how can you leave us behind alone?" The Zaddik whispered to him, "The bear is in the woods, and Pinhas is a sage." His disciple knew that these words referred to Rabbi Bear of Mezrich and Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz, although Pinhas did not belong to the group of disciples. But he had come to the Baal Shem twice, the second time just before his death, and the Baal Shem had been to see him twice as well. After the master's death, Rabbi Bear taught in his place. But Rabbi Pinhas continued to lead an anonymous existence. In the house of study, he said his prayers behind the stove, and no one paid any attention to him. Now, Rabbi David of Ostrog, who was a well-to-do man, was in the habit of buying 2 exceptionally fine citrons every year before the Feast of Tabernacles, one for the Baal Shem, the other for himself. The year the master died, he brought 3 beautiful fruits instead of 2 before the holiday, one for himself, one for Rabbi Bear, and one for Rabbi Pinhas. That year citrons were very scarce, and not a single one had gotten to Koretz. On the first day of the feast, the congregation waited with praying to see whether one would perhaps be brought from a neighboring town to which they had sent for it. Finally, the heads of the congregation decided that the daily morning prayer should be said, that in the meantime, a messenger might still arrive, but the morning prayer was ended, and no one had come. So the reader was asked to begin the liturgy proper to that day. Hesitatingly, he went up to the pulpit. He had not yet said the blessing when the black Malamed came out from behind the stove, walked to the reader, and said to him, "Do not begin yet." Then he returned to his place behind the stove. The people had not noticed anything, but when they asked the reader why he did not begin, and he referred them to Rabbi Pinhas, they were annoyed and asked for an explanation. "At the right time," he told them, "the citron will be here." "What do you mean?" they shouted. "What do you mean by the right time?" "In an hour, and if it has not come by then, you'll have to put up with a kick or so, won't you?" "I have nothing against that," he replied. Before the hour was up, they reported that a peasant had come on horseback to bring something to Rabbi Pinhas. It was the citron and a letter. Everyone crowded around to read it. The recipient was addressed as the head of all the sons of the diaspora. The writer of the letter was known to many as a holy man. Rabbi Pinhas took the citron, had them bring the palm fronds, and spoke the blessing. They asked him to give them to the reader, so that he might recite the Hallel Psalms. "I shall recite them," he said. He went to the pulpit and prayed before the congregation. Without a guest. It is told, when Rabbi Pinhas had become known, and more Hasidim came to him with their concerns, he was alarmed to see how much all this diverted him from the service of God and the study of the Torah. The only solution he could think of was that people must stop bringing their problems to him, and his prayer was granted. From that time on, he did not live with his fellow men except when he prayed with the congregation, but kept himself apart and devoted himself solely to the service of his Lord. When the Feast of Tabernacles approached, he had to let a non-Jew make his holiday booth, for the Jews refused to help him. Since he lacked the proper tools, he sent his wife to borrow them from a neighbor, but it was only with the greatest difficulty that she could get what was needed. When he was in the house of study on the evening of the feast, he asked some wayfarers to dine with him, as he did every year. But he was so thoroughly hated, far and wide, that no one would accept his invitation, and he had to go home alone. When he had said the words bidding the holy guests, the patriarchs, to enter the booth that evening, he saw our father Abraham standing outside, like someone who has come to a house he is accustomed to visit, and only just sees that it is not the house, he thought, and pauses in surprise. "What wrong have I done?" Rabbi Pinhas cried. "It is not my custom to enter a house where no wayfarers have come as guests," our father Abraham replied. From then on, Rabbi Pinhas prayed he might find favor in the eyes of his fellow men, and again his prayer was granted. The breaking of the vessels. Rabbi Pinhas said, "We all know that very long ago, when God was building worlds and tearing them down, the vessels broke because they could not endure the abundance poured into them. But through this, light penetrated to the lower worlds, and they did not remain in darkness. It is the same with the breaking of vessels in the soul of the Tzaddik." The teaching of the soul. Rabbi Pinhas often cited the words, "A man's soul will teach him," and emphasized them by adding, "There is no man who is not incessantly being taught by his soul." One of his disciples asked, "If this is so, why don't men obey their souls?" "The soul teaches incessantly," Rabbi Pinhas explained, "but it never repeats." The pupil. Rabbi Pinhas said, "Ever since I began giving true service to my Maker, I have not tried to get anything, but only taken what God gave me. It is because the pupil is dark that it absorbs every ray of light." Sefirot. Rabbi Pinhas said, "Every word and every action contains all the 10 Sefirot, the 10 powers emanating from God, for they fill the entire world." And it is not the way people think, that mercy is a principle in itself, and rigor is a principle in itself. For all the 10 creative powers are contained in every single thing. Whoever drops his hand does so in the secret of the efflux of light. Whoever lifts his hand does so in the secret of the reflux of light. The completed motion of lowering and lifting houses the secret of mercy and rigor. There are no words which, in themselves, are useless. There are no actions which, in themselves, are useless. But one can make useless both actions and words by saying or doing them uselessly. Hiding. Rabbi Raphael of Breslov, the favorite disciple of Rabbi Pinhas, told, "On the first day of Hanukkah, I complained to my teacher that in adversity, it is very difficult to retain perfect faith in the belief that God provides for every human being. It actually seems as if God were hiding his face from such an unhappy being. What shall he do to strengthen his faith?" The rabbi replied, "It ceases to be a hiding if you know it is hiding." The doubter. A disciple of Rabbi Pinhas was tormented by doubt, for he could not see how it was possible for God to know all his thoughts, even the vaguest and most fleeting. He went to his teacher in great anguish to beg him to dispel the confusion in his heart. Rabbi Pinhas was standing at the window and saw his visitor arrive. He entered, greeted his master, and was about to tell him his troubles, when the Tzaddik said, "My friend, I know, and why should God not know?" On the throne. Rabbi Pinhas said, "At New Year's, God is in that concealment, which is called the sitting on the throne, and everyone can see him, everyone according to his own nature, one in weeping, one in prayer, and one in the song of praise." Before the ram's horn was sounded, one New Year's Day, just before the ram's horn was sounded, Rabbi Pinhas said, "All creatures renew themselves in sleep, even stones and streams, and if man wants to renew his life over and over, then before falling asleep, he must put from him his shape and commend his naked soul to God. It will ascend and receive new life. But today is the day of the great renewal, and deep sleep falls on all spiritual creatures, on angels and holy names, and the letters of the scriptures. This is the meaning of the great judgment in which the spirit is renewed. And so today, man shall be destroyed in deep sleep, and the renewing hand of God will touch him." After these words, he raised the ram's horn to his lips. On the day of destruction, they asked Rabbi Pinhas, why should the Messiah be born on the anniversary of the destruction of the temple? as the tradition has it. The kernel, he replied, which is sown in earth, must fall to pieces so that the ear of grain may sprout from it. Strength cannot be resurrected until it has dwelt in deep secrecy. To doff a shape, to don a shape, this is done in the instant of pure nothingness. In the husk of forgetting, the power of memory grows. That is the power of redemption. On the day of destruction, power lies at the bottom of the depths and grows. That is why, on this day, we sit on the ground. That is why, on this day, we visit graves. That is why, on this day, the Messiah is born. For the sake of renewal, Rabbi Pinhas said, Solomon, the preacher, says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, because he wants to destroy the world so that it may receive new life. The miracle of the light. Rabbi Pinhas said, listen, and I shall tell you the meaning of the miracle of the light at Hanukkah. The light which was hidden since the days of creation was then revealed. And every year, when the lights are lit for Hanukkah, the hidden light is revealed afresh, and it is the light of the Messiah. A man on earth. They asked Rabbi Pinhas, why is it written, in the day that God created a man on earth, and not in the day that God created man on earth? He explained, you should serve your Maker as though there were only one man on earth, only yourself. The place of man. They asked Rabbi Pinhas, why is God called Makom, that is, place? He certainly is the place of the world, but then he ought to be called that, and not just place. He replied, man should go into God, so that God may surround him and become his place. The easy deaf. Once they asked Rabbi Pinhas why, when he prayed, they could hear no sound and see no movement, so that he seemed to lack the fervor which shook the other tzaddikim from head to foot. Brothers, he answered, to pray means to cling to God, and to cling to God means to loose oneself from all substance, as if the soul left the body. Our sages say that there is a death which is as hard as drawing a rope through the ring on the mast, and there is a death as easy as drawing a hair out of milk, and this is called the death in the kiss. This is the one which was granted to my prayer. He is your psalm. Concerning the words in the scriptures, he is thy psalm, and he is thy God. Rabbi Pinhas said the following, he is your psalm, and he also is your God. The prayer a man says, the prayer in itself is God. It is not as if you were asking something of a friend. He is different, and your words are different. It is not so in prayer, for prayer unites the principles. When a man who is praying thinks his prayer is something apart from God, he is like a suppliant to whom the king gives what he has begged from him. But he who knows that prayer in itself is God is like the king's son who takes whatever he needs from the stores of his father. The Prayer Book. In the days of Rabbi Pinhas, the prayer book, which is based on the Kavanah of letters and bears the name of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the great Kabbalist, had just been published. The Zaddik's disciples obtained his permission to pray from that book, but after a time they came to him and complained that since they were using it for their prayers, they had lost the sense of intensified life which prayer had always given them. Rabbi Pinhas told them, you have put all the strength and purposefulness of your thinking into the Kavanah of the holy names and the combinations of the letters, and have deviated from the essential, to make your hearts whole and dedicate them to God. That is why you have lost the live feeling of holiness. In praise of song. Rabbi Pinhas always spoke in high praise of music and song. Once he said, Lord of the world, if I could sing, I should not let you remain up above. I should harry you with my song until you came down and stayed here with us. The one thing. Once they told Rabbi Pinhas of the great misery among the needy. He listened, sunk in grief, then he raised his head. Let us draw God into the world, he cried, and all need will be quenched. Valid prayer. Rabbi Pinhas said, a prayer which is not spoken in the name of all Israel is no prayer at all. When two sing, is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Rabbi Pinhas said, when a man is singing and cannot lift his voice, and another comes and sings with him, another who can lift his voice, then the first will be able to lift his voice too. That is the secret of the bond between spirit and spirit. The ear that is no ear. Rabbi Pinhas said, in the book The Duties of the Heart, we read that he who conducts his life as he ought should see with eyes that are no eyes, hear with ears that are no ears. And that is just how it is. For often, when someone comes to ask my advice, I hear him giving himself the answer to his question. The quickening. They asked Rabbi Pinhas, why is it that a person who sees his friend after an interval of more than 12 months says the blessing, who quickeneth the dead? He answered, every human being has a light in heaven. When two meet, the lights fuse, and a new light shines out of them. This is called a begetting, and the new light is an angel. But this angel cannot live longer than 12 months, unless those two beings meet on earth again before the time is up. But if they meet after the 12 months have passed, they can quicken the angel again for a time. That is why they say that blessing. Differences. Rabbi Raphael asked his teacher, why is no face like any other? Rabbi Pinhas replied, because man is created in the image of God. Every human being sucks the living strength of God from another place, and all together they make up man. That is why their faces all differ from one another. In everyone. Rabbi Pinhas said, in everyone there is something precious, which is in no one else. That is why it is said, despise not any man. And this is how he expounded the saying in the Talmud, that every just man will burn himself with the baldachin of his neighbor, with the secret core of his neighbor, that is, with the precious thing hidden in the being of his neighbor, and among all men only in him. The water carrier. The wife of Rabbi Pinhas once scolded her servant. This annoyed the rabbi, and he said to her, one should never hurt a Jew. A Jew is precious, very precious. He pointed to a water carrier by the name of Hirsch, who was just taking a pail into the house. The man was very simple-minded and still unmarried, although he was about 40 years old. The rabbi said to his wife, I tremble before Herschel because he is so precious. Country houses. Rabbi Pinhas said, God's relationship to the wicked may be compared to that of a prince who, besides his magnificent palaces, owns all manner of little houses hidden away in the woods and in villages, and visits them occasionally to hunt or to rest. The dignity of a palace is no greater than that of such a temporary abode, for the two are not alike, and what the lesser accomplishes, the greater cannot. It is the same with the righteous man. Though his value and service be great, he cannot accomplish what the wicked man accomplishes in the hour he prays, or does something to honor God. And God, who is watching the worlds of confusion, rejoices in him. That is why the righteous man should not consider himself better than the wicked. Concerning anger. Rabbi Pinhas once said to a Hasid, if a man wishes to guide the people in his house the right way, he must not grow angry at them. For anger does not only make one's soul impure, it transfers impurity to the souls of those with whom one is angry. Another time he said, since I have tamed my anger, I keep it in my pocket. When I need it, I take it out. Gog. In the intermediate days of the Feast of Tabernacles, Rabbi Pinhas expounded the passage from Ezekiel, which is read that week, and which deals with the coming of Gog and Magog. He said, according to the tradition, the main battle in the wars of Gog falls within the days of the Feast of Tabernacles. People have a way of saying about persons or nations, he is as great as Gog. It is as great as Gog. And why? Because Gog is great in arrogance and brutality. And that is the battle which we must fight at the Feast of Tabernacles, the battle against our own pride. Endless struggle. Rabbi Raphael, who was humble all of his days and avoided being honored, begged his teacher over and over to tell him how he could wholly fend off pride, but received no answer. Again he pressed his master. "O Rabbi, pride, pride, what do you want?" said Rabbi Pinhas. "This is a piece of work with which a man must wrestle all his years, and which he can never finish. For pride is the garment of God, as it is written, 'The Lord is king, he is clothed in pride, but God is boundless, and he who is proud injures the garment of the unbounded.' And so the work of self-conquest is without bounds." Out of the net. This was Rabbi Pinhas' comment on the verse in the psalm, "Mine eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he will bring forth my feet out of the net." And 1. As the bird catcher baits the net, and the bird comes and pecks at it, and tangles his foot in the cord, so the evil urge confronts men with all the good they have done, learning, charities, and all manner of devout actions, in order to snare them in the net of pride. But if he succeeds in this, man can free himself no more than the captive bird. Then nothing can save him except the help of God. The bees. Rabbi Raphael of Breslov said, "They say that the proud are reborn as bees, for in his heart the proud man says, 'I am a writer, I am a singer, I am a great one at studying.' And since what is said of such men is true, that they will not turn to God, not even on the threshold of hell, they are reborn after they die. They are born again as bees, which hum and buzz, 'I am, I am, I am.'" A boon to God. Rabbi Raphael said, "What a boon that God prohibited pride. If he had bidden us be proud, how could I possibly do God's commandment?" What you pursue. Rabbi Pinhas used to say, "What you pursue, you don't get. But what you allow to grow slowly in its own way comes to you. Cut open a big fish, and in its belly you will find the little fish lying head down." The greater strength. He also used to say, "The strength of him who accepts reproof is greater than his who reproves. For if a man humbles himself to accept reproof and to recognize the truth of it, then God's words apply to him. 'I dwell in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit.'" More love. When Rabbi Pinhas and his disciples discussed wicked or hostile persons, they recalled the advice the Baal Shem Tov once gave to the father of a renegade son, that he should love him more. "When you see," they said, "that someone hates you and does you harm, rally your spirit and love him more than before. That is the only way you can make him turn. For the whole of Israel is a vehicle for holiness. If love and unity prevail among them, then the divine presence and all holiness is about them. But if God forbid, there should be a schism, a rift appears, and through the opening holiness falls down into the shells. And so, if your neighbor grows remote from you in spirit, you must approach him more closely than before to fill out the rift." Rabbi Shemuel told this about Rabbi Raphael of Breslov. When he was going on his summer trip, he called me and asked me to share his carriage with him. I said, "I am afraid I should crowd you." Then he said to me, in the manner he always used to express special affection, "Let us love each other more, and we shall have a feeling of spaciousness." And after we had prayed, he said to me, "God is a great-hearted friend." Rabbi Raphael said, "Measured behavior is a dreadful evil. It is a dreadful evil when a man measures his behavior to his fellow men. It is as if he were always manipulating weights and measures." Once Rabbi Raphael was ill and thought he was going to die. Then he said, "Now all merits must be set aside, lest they separate my heart from the heart of any Jew in the world." Rabbi Pinhas said, "We should also pray for the wicked among the peoples in the world. We should love them too. While we do not pray like this, while we do not love like this, the Messiah will not come." Unquote. He used to say, "My Raphael knows how to love the most wicked evildoers." Peace. Concerning the words of the prayer, "He who maketh peace in his high places, may he make peace for us," Rabbi Pinhas said, "We all know that heaven, Shemayim, came into being when God made peace between fire Esh and water Mayim. And he who could make peace between the utmost extremes will surely be able to make peace between us. Rabbi Raphael of Bershad was very eager to make peace. He often went into the homes of the Hasidim and addressed their wives, so that the readiness to keep peace with their husbands might grow in their hearts. Once, on the 9th day of Av, the anniversary of the destruction of the temple, he happened to be in a community whose members had for a long time been nursing a quarrel which grew more and more involved and difficult to end. One of the factions approached him with the request to arbitrate. But the rabbi, so they said, will probably not want to bother with our affairs in this period of mourning. No day is better than this, he replied, for it was because of an idle quarrel that the city of God was destroyed. On the Sabbath, when the first chapter in the scriptures, the story of creation, is read, the Hasidim in Bershad sit in a circle all day and sing over and over, Sabbath of creation, all in one. Sabbath of creation, all in one. The most important quality. Rabbi Pinhas used to say, I am always afraid to be more clever than devout. And then he added, I should rather be devout than clever. But rather than both devout and clever, I should like to be good. End quote. For truth. Rabbi Pinhas told his disciples, I have found nothing more difficult than to overcome lying. It took me 14 years. I broke every bone I had, and at last I found a way out. He also said, for the sake of truth, I served 21 years. 7 years to find out what truth is, 7 to drive out falsehood, and 7 to absorb truth. Once, when Rabbi Pinhas was at the desk, reciting the evening prayer, and came to the words, Who guardest thy people Israel, he screamed aloud from the very bottom of his soul. The countess who owned the region happened to be passing the house of prayer. She leaned over one of the low windowsills and listened. Then she said to those around her, how true that scream was, how without any admixture of falsehood. When they repeated her remark to Rabbi Pinhas, he said with a smile, even the peoples of the world know the truth when they hear it. On a certain eve of the Day of Atonement, before praying all vows, the assembled congregation recited the Psalms in noisy confusion. Rabbi Pinhas turned to them and said, why do you exert yourselves so much? Probably because you feel that your words are not mounting upward. And why not? Because you have told nothing but lies the entire year. He who lies throughout the year gets a lying tongue. And how can a lying tongue shape true words which mount to heaven? I, who am talking to you, know all about it, because I myself had a hard time with this matter. So you can believe me. You must assume the burden of not telling lies. Then you will get a truthful tongue, and the words it shapes will fly to God. In fact, with the evil urge, once, when Rabbi Pinhas entered the house of study, he saw that his disciples, who had been talking busily, stopped and started at his coming. He asked them, what were you talking about? Rabbi, they said, we were saying how afraid we are, that the evil urge will pursue us. Don't worry, he replied. You have not gotten high enough for it to pursue you. For the time being, you are still pursuing it. What is punishable? A certain Zadok died, and soon after appeared in a dream to Rabbi Pinhas, who had been his friend. Rabbi Pinhas asked him, what is the attitude toward the sins of youth? They are not taken seriously, said the dead man. Not if a man has atoned, but false piety that is punished with great severity. The pulpit. Once Rabbi Pinhas came into the house of study, and his glance fell on a pulpit. This pulpit too, he said, is judged on New Year's Day, whether it is to break or to be preserved. The barrier. Rabbi Pinhas said, on the Sabbath, people come to hear words of teaching. They are full of fervor, and on the very first weekday, everything is exactly as it was. For just as the senses, so memory too meets with a barrier. As soon as the holiness of the Sabbath is over, All are 1,000 miles away from it, and no one remembers it anymore. It is as when a madman recovers. He is unable to remember what happened in the days of his madness. The pin in the shirt. Once some women came to Rabbi Pinhas from a nearby town and bothered him with their trivial concerns. When he saw them at his door again on the following morning before prayer, he fled to his son's house and cried, "If only the Messiah came, so that we might get rid of the Tzaddikim, the good Jews." After a while, he added, "You think that it is the wicked who delay the coming of the Messiah. Not so, it is the good Jews who are delaying it. A nail somewhere in the wall, what has that to do with me? But a pin sticking in my shirt, that's what pricks." Fame? The Spola grandfather said, "To be famous is not a good thing. Once I went from town to town with the poor wayfarers. In our wanderings, we came to a town in which Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz was living at that time. There was feasting in his house, and a large table was spread with food for the poor. I entered with the rest and sat down. Rabbi Pinhas himself went from one man to the next and gave each a cake. When he came to me, he raised me from the bench until I was level with his face and kissed me on the forehead. When I was beginning to grow famous, I drove to his town to spend the Sabbath with him, dressed in a splendid robe. After the fashion of the famous, I approached and greeted him. He merely glanced at me and asked, 'Where are you from?' To be famous is not a good thing." The man who denies God. Rabbi Pinhas said, "Whoever says that the words of the Torah are one thing and the words of the world another must be regarded as a man who denies God." Dreams. Rabbi Pinhas said, "Dreams are a secretion of our thoughts, and through them our thought is purified. All the wisdom in the world is a secretion of the Torah, and through it the Torah is purified. That is why we read, 'When the Lord brings back those that return to Zion, we will be like unto them that dream.' For then it will be revealed that wisdom exists only that the Torah may be purified, and exile only that the thought of Israel may be purified, and all will be like a dream." End 5. The tongue of tongues. They asked Rabbi Pinhas, "How are we to understand that before the building of the Tower of Babel, all men spoke one tongue in common, but that when God confounded their language, each group of people spoke its own tongue? How was it possible for each people suddenly to speak and understand a language of its own, instead of the tongue which had been common to them all?" Rabbi Pinhas explained, "Before the building of the tower, all peoples had in common the holy tongue, but each people had its own language besides. That is why it is written, 'And the whole earth was of one language,' that is, the holy language. And of one speech means that besides the holy language they had in common, each people had its own special tongue. This they used to communicate with one another, while the holy tongue was used between different peoples. When God punished them, he took from them the holy tongue." Originality. Rabbi Pinhas said, "When a man embarks on something great, in the spirit of truth, he need not be afraid that another may imitate him. But if he does not do it in the spirit of truth, but plans to do it in a way no one could imitate, then he drags the great down to the lowest level, and everyone can do the same." The eunuchs. Once Rabbi Shmelka and his brother, who subsequently became the rabbi of Frankfurt, drove to Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz in order to savor the true taste of the Sabbath. They arrived on Friday and found the Tzaddik in the kitchen where, in honor of the holy hours to come, he was supervising the cooking of the fish. He greeted his guests with the words, Isaiah says, "Thus saith the Lord," concerning the eunuchs, that is, those who cannot enjoy holy delight, "Let them keep my Sabbaths. Keep the Sabbath, and you will savor its full taste." All joys. Rabbi Pinhas said, "All joys hail from paradise, and jests too, provided they are uttered in true joy." The Watchers. A wedding was once celebrated in the house of Rabbi Pinhas. The feasting went on for days, and the number of guests did not lessen. Yet during all that time, nothing was damaged. Not the smallest flask was broken. When the people expressed surprise at this, The rabbi said, "Why are you astonished? The dead are good watchers." Now they understood why, while the dance was going on, he had called out, "You dead, you have nothing to do. Watch well that no damage is done." The parting. Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, the wandering Tzaddik, used to visit Rabbi Pinhas several times a year. They did not agree concerning worldly matters because Rabbi Leib did his work all over the world, in a secret manner, while Rabbi Pinhas believed no one could do his work well except in that place which was appointed for him. But at parting, he always said to his friend, "We shall never agree, but your work has heaven for its goal, and my work has heaven for its goal, and so we are united, and what we do is one and the same thing." Once Rabbi Leib came to Ostrog for the Day of Atonement. At the close of the service, he went to Rabbi Pinhas to exchange wishes for the coming year with him. The two closed the door and talked with each other for a time. When Rabbi Pinhas came out, his cheeks were wet and the tears still streamed from his eyes. As he accompanied Rabbi Leib out, the Hasidim heard him say, "What can I do since it is your will to go first?" That year Rabbi Leib died toward the end of the winter, in the month Adar, and Rabbi Pinhas toward the end of summer, in the month Elul. Mourning. In after years, the Hasidim related this incident. At the last bend in the road which leads to the west wall of the temple, the Wailing Wall, a Tzaddik saw a tall woman one evening. She was veiled from head to foot and wept softly to herself. Then his own eyes filled with tears, and for an instant he could not see. When he looked up, the woman had vanished. For whom can the divine presence be mourning, if not for Rabbi Pinhas? He exclaimed to his soul, tore his robe, and said the blessing for the dead. Testimony. Rabbi Raphael of Bershad was known far and wide for his integrity. Once his testimony was to be the deciding factor in condemning a Jew who had been accused of a crime. Rabbi Raphael knew that the man was guilty. The night before the court was to assemble, he did not go to bed but struggled with himself in prayer until the dawn of day. Then he lay down on the floor, closed his eyes, and died on the instant. Here I have made an exception to the practice of limiting each chapter to one Tzaddik, because the school of Pinhas of Koretz continues and complements his personality and teachings. I am representing it in this chapter in the person of Rabbi Raphael. Yehiel Mikhail of Zlotchov. The want. In early life, Rabbi Yehiel Mikhail lived in great poverty, but not for an hour did happiness desert him. Someone once asked him, "Rabbi, how can you pray day after day? Blessed be thou, who has supplied my every want, for surely you lack everything a man has need of." He replied, "My want is, most likely, poverty, and that is what I have been supplied with." On two rungs. When Rabbi Michal was still poor and taught children in the city of Breslov, a man who was fond of joking came to him on a Friday toward evening and asked him the following question: "How much effort and trouble must a poor man go through before he gets together what he needs for the Sabbath? For the well-to-do burgher, on the other hand, it is no trouble at all. But when the Sabbath arrives, and the poor man begins to study the tractate for the Sabbath, the first thing he reads about are the circumstances under which a poor man who takes becomes guilty of desecrating the Sabbath, while the rich burgher who gives is considered blameless. Why does it begin with the guilt of the poor man?" In asking this, the man had nothing in mind but to make a jest. But Rabbi Michal took the question seriously. "Come and take the evening meal with me," he said. "I shall think it over until then." After the meal, he repeated the question and gave this answer: "The guilt of the poor man is mentioned in the beginning, because it is he who first stretched out his hand to take." Many years later, while Rabbi Mordecai of Neskish was visiting his teacher, Rabbi Michal, the Maggid of Zlotchov, a devout and learned man, came and asked for a little money. The Maggid told Rabbi Mordecai to give him a small sum. A short time after this, a tramp who looked common and coarse also asked for alms. Rabbi Michal himself gave him something. When he was asked why he behaved differently in these two instances, he said, "Every act of charity can bring about a sacred union, if the hand of him who gives touches that of him who takes. But when the receiver is a man of slight value, then it is more difficult to accomplish this union." The cow. It is told, during the years when the holy Maggid of Zlachov was still unrecognized, he was so poor that his wife had no shoes and went around in slippers she had made with her own hands. At that time, he often fasted from one Sabbath to the next and did not come home from the house of study the entire week. Each morning, his wife sold the milk of the one cow they owned, and with the proceeds supported herself and her children. One Friday morning, the cow gave no milk, lay down, and did not move. After several hours, when all attempts to revive her had failed, the woman gave up in despair and hired a peasant to flay the animal. Before he had started on the job, Rabbi Michal came home. When he saw the cow lying in the courtyard, he tapped her gently with his stick and said, "Hey there, get up. You have to provide for us." And the cow got up. The Baal Shem's messenger. Before he was recognized, Rabbi Yehiel Michal lived in the city of Yampol, not far from Mezbij, the city of the Baal Shem Tov. At that time, the Baal Shem's Hasidim included a cattle dealer who used to come to his master before setting out on a business trip in order to spend the Sabbath near him. Once, when he was taking leave after a visit of this kind, the Baal Shem said to him, "When you get to Yampol, give Rabbi Mekele my greetings." But when he got to Yampol, the man asked around in vain for a rabbi by that name. Finally, he went to the house of study and inquired there. "No," they said, "we have never heard of that rabbi." But someone added, "We do have a Mekele here, but no one has ever called him rabbi. As a matter of fact, the children call him the crazy man, and no one except the children ever bothers about him. For how can one deal with a man who beats his head against the wall while he prays until the blood spurts out?" "I want to talk to him," said the cattle dealer. "That will not be so easy," they told him. "When he is at home and sitting over his books, he will not let anyone disturb him. But if you go up to him and whisper, 'I should like something to eat,' he will jump up to get food for his guest, and then you can talk to him." The dealer asked the way to the crazy man. He lived in a tumble-down house, and ragged children were huddled at his door. Rabbi Michal was sitting at the table before an open book of the Kabbalah. He did not look up when his visitor entered. The man went up to him and said in a low tone, "I should like something to eat." Instantly, the rabbi rose, looked around, and went through drawers and cupboards, but everything was empty. He picked up a book, ran out with it, took it to the store as a pledge, and brought back bread and herring. While his visitor ate, he said, "The Baal Shem Tov told me to give you his greetings." Rabbi Michal bowed his head in silence. Later, the cattle dealer said, "Rabbi Mekele, I see that you are a holy man, and since this is so, all you need do is to pray for wealth and you will have it. Why do you live in such want?" "A king," replied the rabbi, "had made preparations for the wedding of his beloved daughter and invited all the people in the city where he lived into his palace. And inscribed on each invitation was the menu of the wedding feast. But suddenly the princess fell ill. No doctor could do anything for her, and a few hours later she died. Quietly, the people who had gathered for the celebration dispersed. They were full of sorrow for the death of their dear and lovely princess. Only one guest stayed. Holding his invitation in his hand, he asked to be served the entire menu, and they did as he asked. There he sat and smacked his lips over his food in shameless pleasure. Shall I behave as he, now that the divine presence, which is the community of Israel, is in exile? Refusal. The people of a certain city begged the Baal Shem Tov to induce his disciple, Yehiel Michal, to accept the position of rabbi, which they had offered him. The Baal Shem Tov urged him to accept, but he persisted in his refusal. "If you do not listen to me," said his master, "you will lose this world and the coming world too." "Even if I lose both worlds," answered his disciple, "I shall not accept what does not befit me." "Then receive my blessing, my son," said the Baal Shem, "that you have withstood temptation." The Revealed Secret. Rabbi Hayim, the famous head of the Talmudic Academy in Brody, heard of the powerful effect the exhortations of young Rabbi Michal had on his hearers. Since the number of evildoers in Brody was increasing, he asked him to speak in the great house of prayer on the coming Sabbath and ordered the entire congregation to attend. Rabbi Michal ascended the pulpit and put his head down on the desk. For a good while he stood in that position. The congregation became impatient, and the worst of the ne'er-do-wells were most indignant that so young a man had the impudence to make them wait. Some of them went up to him to snatch him from the pulpit, but they did not dare carry out their purpose when they saw the director of the Talmudic Academy leaning against a pillar of the pulpit and clasping it with his hands. At last, Rabbi Michal raised his head. "It is written," he said, "the secret counsel of the Lord is with them that fear him. Secret transgressions he reveals to those who fear him, that their warning may strike straight into the hearts of the transgressors." Everyone in the house of prayer heard these words, although they were uttered in a low voice, and there was not one who could keep back the tears welling in his eyes. Through the hat. Once Rabbi Michal visited a city where he had never been before. Soon some of the prominent members of the congregation came to call on him. He fixed a long gaze on the forehead of everyone who came, and then told him the flaws in his soul and what he could do to heal them. It got around that there was a Hasidic in the city who was versed in reading faces and could tell the quality of the soul by looking at the forehead. The next visitors pulled their hats down to their noses. "You are mistaken," Rabbi Michal said to them. "An eye which can see through the flesh can certainly see through the hat." The time Rabbi Elimelech was frightened. In his later years, Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk, who was on a journey, met a young man with a knapsack on his back. "Where are you bound for?" he asked him. "I am going to the holy Maggid of Zlotchov," was the reply. "When I was young," said Rabbi Elimelech, "I heard one day that Rabbi Yehiel Michal was visiting a town not far from Lizensk. I immediately started on my way there. When I arrived, I looked for a place to stay, but all the houses were empty. Finally, I found a very old woman busy at her stove. This is what she told me. Everyone has gone to the house of prayer. There's a rabbi there who has made the day into a day of atonement. There he stands and is telling everyone his sins and praying forgiveness for everyone. When I heard that, I was frightened and went back to Lizensk." Heavy penance. There was once a man who had desecrated the Sabbath against his will because his carriage had broken down, and although he walked and almost ran, he did not reach the town before the beginning of the holy hours. For this, young Rabbi Michal imposed a very harsh and long penance on him. The man tried to do as he had been told with all his strength, but he soon found that his body could not endure it. He began to feel ill, and even his mind became affected. About this time he learned that the Baal Shem was traveling through this region and had stopped in a place nearby. He went to him, mustered his courage, and begged the master to rid him of the sin he had committed. "Carry a pound of candles to the house of prayer," said the Baal Shem, "and have them lit for the Sabbath. Let that be your penance." The man thought the Tzaddik had not quite understood what he had told him, and repeated his request most urgently. When the Baal Shem insisted on his incredibly mild dictum, the man told him how heavy a penance had been imposed on him. "You just do as I said," the master replied, "and tell Rabbi Michal to come to the city of Shvostov, where I shall hold the coming Sabbath." The man's face had cleared. He took leave of the rabbi. On the way to Shvostov, a wheel broke on Rabbi Michal's carriage, and he had to continue on foot. Although he hurried all he could, it was dark when he entered the town, and when he crossed the Baal Shem's threshold, he saw he had already risen, his hand on the cup, to say the blessing over the wine, to introduce the day of rest. The master paused and said to Rabbi Michal, who was standing before him, numb and speechless, "Good Sabbath, my sinless friend. You had never tasted the sorrow of the sinner. Your heart had never throbbed with his despair, and so it was easy for your hand to deal out penance." To himself. In a sermon which Rabbi Michal once gave before a large gathering, he said, "My words shall be heeded, And he added immediately, I do not say, you shall heed my words. I say, my words shall be heeded. I address myself too. I too must heed my words. Humility, no commandment. They asked the Maggid of Zlotchov, all the commandments are written in the Torah, but humility, which is worth all the other virtues put together, is not stated in it as a commandment. All we read about it is the words in praise of Moses, saying that he was more humble than all other people. What is the significance of this silence concerning humility? The rabbi replied, if anyone were humble in order to keep a commandment, he would never attain to true humility. To think humility is a commandment is the prompting of Satan. He bloats a man's heart, telling him he is learned and righteous and devout, a master in all good works, and worthy to think himself better than the general run of people, but that this would be proud and impious, since it is a commandment that he must be humble and put himself on a par with others. And a man who interprets this as a commandment and does it only feeds his pride, the more in doing so. The helpmeet. The Maggid of Zlotchov was asked by one of his disciples. The Talmud says that the child in the womb of his mother looks from one end of the world to the other and knows all the teachings, but that the instant it comes in contact with the air of earth, an angel strikes it on the mouth, and it forgets everything. I do not understand why this should be. First, know everything and then forget it? A trace is left behind in man, the rabbi answered, by dint of which he can reacquire knowledge of the world and the teachings and do his service. But why must the angel strike him? Asked the disciple. If this were not so, there would be no evil. Quite true, the rabbi answered. But if there were no evil, there would be no good, for good is the counterpart of evil. Everlasting delight is no delight. That is how we must interpret what we are taught, that the creation of the world took place for the good of its creatures, and that is why it is written, it is not good that the man, that is to say the primal man God created, should be alone, that is, without the counter-effect and the hindrance of the evil urge, as before the creation of the world, for there is no good unless its counterpart exists. And further on we read, I will make him a helpmeet. For him the fact that evil confronts good gives man the possibility of victory, of rejecting evil and choosing good, and only then does the good exist truly and perfectly. Man and the evil urge. This is what Rabbi Michal said concerning the verse in the scriptures. Let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. That is what the evil urge says to man secretly. For this urge is to become good and wants to become good by driving man to overcome it and to make it good. And that is his secret request to the man he is trying to seduce. Let us leave this disgraceful state and take service with the Creator, so that I too may go and mount with you rung by rung, although I seem to oppose, to disturb, and hinder you. Multiply. A disciple tells, once, when my teacher, Rabbi Yehiel Michal, was in his prayer room in Brody, he heard a man reciting the 613 commandments. He said jestingly, why are you reciting the commandments? They were given to do, not to recite. I asked him what he meant by this, whether we are not supposed to teach and learn the commandments too. In the case of every commandment, he said, we should try to discover how it can be done. Let us begin with the first of all commandments. Be fruitful and multiply. Why do you think two verbs are used here instead of one? I was silent because I was ashamed to speak, but when he repeated his question, I said, Rashi interprets it in this way. If it only said be fruitful, we might think that one man should always beget only one child. But then, he objected, it would be enough to say merely, multiply. The son of Rabbi Zusha of Hanapol, who was also saying his prayers there, pointed out that in another passage it is written, and I will make you fruitful and multiply you, that here also two verbs were used. This too is difficult, said Rabbi Michal, and again put his question to me. I mentioned that Rashi refers the words, and will multiply you, to the upright posture, which distinguishes man from animals. But what has it to do with upright posture? Asked the rabbi. I did not know what to say. He said, "This is the way Rabbi Mendel of Primishlan expounded the verse in the Mishnah. He who rides the ass shall dismount and pray. That is, he who masters the animal within him need not suppress it, since in an eternal prayer he is devoted and consecrated to God in all that he does, and has become freed of his body. Thus man can perform bodily acts in this world. He can cohabit, and though seen from the outside his movements may be those of an animal, within he is free as an angel, for in what he does he is devoted and consecrated to God. And this is what is meant by the commandment, be fruitful, not like animals, but multiply. And that means be more than they. Do not walk bent over, but upright, and cling to God as the bough clings to the root, and consecrate your cohabitation to him. This is the will of God, not only to make us fruitful, but to multiply our powers. Learn from all. They asked Rabbi Michal, in the sayings of the fathers we read, who is wise? He who learns from all men, as it is said, from all my teachers I have gotten understanding. Then why does it not say, he who learns from every teacher? Rabbi Michal explained. The master, who pronounced these words, is intent on having it clear that we can learn not only from those whose occupation is to teach, but from every man. Even from one who is ignorant, or from one who is wicked, you can gain understanding as to how to conduct your life. The unity of qualities. Rabbi Yehiel Michal said, the words in the scriptures, but ye that cleave unto the Lord your God are alive, every one of you this day, is expounded as follows. Cleave to his qualities, but this must be properly understood. Emanating from God are 10 qualities, and these come in twos which oppose each other like two colors, one of which is apparently in direct contrast to the other. But seen with the true inner eye, they all form one simple unity. It is the task of man to make them appear a unity to the true outer eye as well. Perhaps one man finds it difficult to be merciful because his way is to be rigorous, and another finds it difficult to be rigorous because his way is merciful. But he who binds the rigor within him to its root, to the rigor of God, and the mercy which is in him to its root, to the mercy of God, and so on in all things, such a man will unite the 10 qualities within himself, and he himself will become the unity they represent, for he cleaves to the Lord of the world. Such a man has become wax, into which both judgment and mercy can set their seal. Imitation of the fathers. The Maggid of Zlachov was asked by one of his disciples. In the book of Elijah we read, everyone in Israel is in duty bound to say, when will my work approach the works of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How are we to understand this? How could we ever venture to think that we could do what our fathers could? The rabbi expounded, just as our fathers invented new ways of serving, each a new service, according to his own character. One, the service of love, the other, that of stern justice, the third, that of beauty. So each one of us, in his own way, shall devise something new in the light of the teachings and of service, and do what has not yet been done. Not for wages. They asked the Maggid of Zlachov, it is written, if ye walk in my statutes, and keep my commandments, and do them, then I will give your rains in their season, and the land shall yield her produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. How is it that God promises us wages for serving him? For our sages have told us that we shall not be like servants who serve their master on condition that they receive wages. The Tzaddik made this reply, it is true that whoever does a commandment for the sake of gain, even if it be gain in the coming world, gets nothing, for all he wanted to do was serve himself. But he who does a commandment out of the true fear and love of God, his doing shines out into the world and draws an abundance of blessings down upon it. Thus the favor of heaven and earth is a sign of right doing, not for sake of gain, but for the sake of God himself. That is why it is written, I have set before thee life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life that thou mayest live, thou and thy seed. Choose the deed of life, which brings abundance of life into the world. This is what Rabbi Michal said concerning the verse in the psalm, Thou hast dealt well with thy servant. What you have done, O Lord, can be designated by the word with. When your servant does your commandment, you are acting along with him. But you give him credit for doing it, as though he had acted alone, without your help. The nature of the teachings. No matter what book Rabbi Michal was reading, whether a book of the open or the hidden teachings, everything he read seemed to him to point to the service of God. When one of his disciples asked him how this was possible, he replied, Could there be anything in the teachings which does not point out to us how to serve God? Our disgrace. Rabbi Michal said, This is our disgrace, that we fear anyone besides God. That is what is said of Jacob in the words, Then Jacob was afraid and he was distressed. We must be distressed because of our fear of Esau. Keeping the law. Disciples asked the Maggid of Zlotchov, In the Talmud, we read that our father Abraham kept all the laws. How could this be, since they had not yet been given to him? All that is needful, he said, is to love God. If you are about to do something and you think it might lessen your love, then you will know it is sin. If you are about to do something and think it will increase your love, you will know that your will is in keeping with the will of God. That is what Abraham did. Concerning the verse in the scriptures, I stood between the Lord and you, Rabbi Michal of Zlotchov said, The I stands between God and us. When a man says I and encroaches upon the word of his maker, he puts a wall between himself and God. But he who offers his I, there is nothing between him and his maker. For it is to him that the words refer, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. When my I has become my beloved's, then it is toward me that his desire turns. Sanctification of God. The disciples of the Maggid of Zlotchov asked him, concerning the words in the scriptures, Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. The Midrash comments, My holiness is beyond your holiness. But who does not know this? What do we learn through this? He expounded, This is what is meant. My holiness, which is the world, depends upon your holiness. As you sanctify my name below, so is it sanctified in the heights of heaven. For it is written, Give ye strength unto God. The praying rabbi. They asked Rabbi Yehiel Michal why he was delaying the prayer. He answered, We are told that the tribe of Dan went last of all the wandering tribes and gathered up everything they had lost. The children of Dan gathered up all the prayers which had been said by the sons of Israel without true fervor, and therefore were lying on the ground. That is just what I am doing. He expounded the passage in the Talmud, which states that the first Hasidim waited for a time before they began to pray in order to concentrate their hearts on God. During the time they were waiting, they prayed to God to help them concentrate their hearts on Him. End quote. Before beginning to pray, he was in the habit of saying, I join myself to all of Israel, to those who are more than I, that through them my thought may rise, and to those who are less than I, so that they may rise through my thought. Concerning the heading of the psalm, a prayer of the afflicted when he fainteth, he said, Join yourself to the prayer of the afflicted, and you will cleave to God. The evil urge once came to him while he was praying. Go away, he said to it, and come back when I am eating. While one is praying, there must be no arguments. His disciples asked him, Why is every knee shall bow to thee, mentioned first in the prayer? Why does every stature shall prostrate itself before thee alone, come second? Why is the word alone used only in the one case and not in the other? He explained, Knees must be bowed before a king of flesh and blood, so that the gesture of homage can be seen. But only before the King of Kings, only before him who examines the heart, can what is upright remain upright, and yet, in reality, be bowed before him. To Rabbi Wolf of Zebaraj, one of his 5 sons, Rabbi Michal once said, "When I had risen in prayer and was standing in the hall of truth, I begged God to grant me that my reason might never proceed against his truth." The rich man. Once when Rabbi Michal was in the city of Brody on a long visit, he made a habit of praying in the Klaus, which went by the name of Hasidim study, although many opponents of the Hasidic teachings attended the daily service there. Now Rabbi Michal did not arrive in the house of prayer until noon, and even after he had put the prayer shawl over his shoulder, he waited for quite a while before he put it on, bound on the phylacteries, and commenced to pray. His learned enemies were annoyed at this, but did not venture to question him themselves. After much reflection and considerable discussion, they sent a rich man by the name of Zalman Pearls to the rabbi. He went up to the tzaddik and asked in respectful tones, "We do not quarrel with the fact that you do not come to the house of prayer until noon, for, most likely, you are not ready in your heart before then. But what does surprise us is that when you have come, you stand there for such a long time before you finally begin to pray. Why do you do this, and what does it mean?" Rabbi Michal asked in his turn, "Is there no one more learned than you here to put this question to me?" "Yes, indeed," answered Pearls. "There are men here so learned that I do not reach even to their ankles." "And why?" said the tzaddik. "Don't they ask me?" "Well," the other replied, "they are poor, and they have broken hearts as poor men have. But I am rich, and my heart is sound." "Well then," said the rabbi, "you yourself admit that the teachings do not ask me why I delay my prayer. Only 60,000 rubles are asking me. But 60,000 rubles shall not have the pleasure of hearing me reveal why I delay my prayer." The Great Chorus. Rabbi Mordecai of Kremnitz, the son of Rabbi Michal, related, "My father used to intone the verse in the psalm, 'My mouth shall speak the praise of the Lord,' as a question. We ask ourselves," he explained to me, "how our mouth can speak the praise of God. For do not the seraphim and the hosts of heaven tremble and grow faint at the greatness of his name?" To this the scriptures reply, "And let all flesh bless his holy name." All flesh, all that is living, just because it is flesh, it is called upon to praise him. We read in the section of songs that even the smallest earthworm chants a song to him, all the more man, who has been granted the power to think up more and more new ways of praising his Maker. Participation. This was Rabbi Michal's comment on the words of Hillel, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am for myself, what am I?" If I am not for myself, that is, if I do not work for myself alone, but continually participate in the congregation, who will be for me? In that case, whatever who, that is, whatever any member of the congregation does in my place, counts just as though I had done it myself. But if I am for myself, if I do not participate with others, if I do not join with them, what am I? Then everything in the way of good works which I have wrought alone is less than nothing in the eyes of God, who is the source of all good. The naming. They asked the Maggid of Zlotchov. We read in the scriptures that God brought the animals to Adam, that he might name them. And why does it say that whatsoever the man called a creature, according to its living soul, that was to be his name? What is meant by living soul? He replied, "You know that every being has the root of its soul, from which it receives its life in the upper worlds." Now Adam knew the soul roots of all creatures, and gave each its right name, each according to its living soul. Dubious faith. A disciple asked the Maggid of Zlotchov, "The words in the scriptures that Noah went into the ark because of the waters of the flood, Rashi interprets to the effect that Noah had small faith. He believed, and yet he did not believe, and not until the waters of the flood compelled him did he go into the ark. Shall we really count Noah, that righteous man, among those who were small of faith?" The tzaddik replied, "There are two sorts of faith: simple faith, which accepts the word and waits to see it fulfilled, and working faith, whose power contributes to the fulfillment of that which is to be. With all his heart Noah feared to believe in the coming of the flood, so that his faith might not make that coming more sure. And so he believed and did not believe, until the waters compelled him. Up the mountain. Rabbi Yehiel Michal said, "It is written, 'Who shall ascend into the mountain of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place?' For the sake of comparison, let us take a man who rides up a mountain in his carriage, and when he is halfway up, the horses are tired, and he must stop and give them a rest. Now, whoever has no sense at this point will roll down, but he who has sense will take a stone and put it under the wheel while the carriage is standing. Then he will be able to reach the top. The man who does not fall, when he is forced to interrupt his service, but knows how to pause, will get to the top of the mountain of the Lord." 1. Temptation. Rabbi Michal said, "When the evil urge tries to tempt man to sin, it tempts him to become all too righteous." The hair shirt. Rabbi Udel, a man known for his fear of God and the harsh penances he imposed on himself, once came to visit the Maggid of Zlotchov. Rabbi Michal said to him, "Udel, you are wearing a hair shirt against your flesh. If you were not given to sudden anger, you would not need it. And since you are given to sudden anger, it will not help you." His sleep. The rabbi of Apt told, "When my teacher, Rabbi Yehiel Michal, slept, he looked like one or the other of the angel beings of the chariot of God. Sometimes he had the face of the spiritual animals, and sometimes that of the holy wheel beings, the one when he wanted to mount to the firmament, the other when a call from the firmament reached him." The Sabbath of Rest. A Hasid asked the Maggid of Zlotchov, "Rashi, our teacher says, what was lacking in the created world? Nothing but rest. Came the Sabbath, and so rest came. Why does he not just say, the world lacked rest until the Sabbath came?" For the words Sabbath and rest mean exactly the same thing. Sabbath, replied the rabbi, means the homecoming. On that day, all the spheres return to their true place. That is what Rashi refers to. During the week, the spheres find no rest because they have been lowered from the place which is theirs. But on the Sabbath, they find rest because they are allowed to go home. Satan's Hasidim. In his old age, Rabbi Michal fasted on many occasions. Finally, one of his disciples ventured to ask him the reason for this self-mortification. The rabbi answered, "I must tell you that Satan has made up his mind to rid the world of Hasidim. First, he tried to harass us. He instigated persecutions. He had us maligned and denounced. He fanned the flames of enmity in houses and alleys and thought that in these ways he could make us despair, that we should grow exhausted and become renegades. But when he realized that his plan had miscarried and that the ranks he had wanted to weaken were strengthened, he thought up something new. He decided to make Hasidim of his own. Soon after, thousands of Satan's Hasidim spread over the land and joined forces with the true Hasidim, so that truth was mixed with falsehood. That is why I fasted. I thought I could thwart this plan of his too. But now I shall not fast anymore, for I see that I cannot keep Satan from continuing to make his own Hasidim. But those who consecrate and truly dedicate themselves to the service of God, those God will separate from the false Hasidim. He will light their eyes with the light of his face, so that for them, truth will not be mixed with lies. The suns and the earth. Rabbi Michal said, "In every generation there are great tzaddikim who shirk the work of salvation by devoting themselves to the Torah. As they fulfill the commandments, each of them ponders on what holy place his soul came from, and is intent on having it go home to that place after its earthly journey is accomplished, to rejoice in the light of heavenly wisdom. That is why to such a man the things of this earth are as nothing, and though he is saddened by the misery among men and the bitter exile of Israel, this is not enough to move his heart to dare in prayer what must be dared. All his great longing is directed solely to his own homecoming. As it is written, 'One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, and the earth abideth forever. The sun also riseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he ariseth. Suns rise and go down, and let the misery on earth endure. Banishment and salvation. A disciple asked the Maggid of Zlotchov, God said to Moses, Now shalt thou see what I shall do to Pharaoh, for by a strong hand shall he let them go, and by a strong hand shall he drive them out of his land. Need the thrall who is freed from heavy servitude be driven into freedom? Will he not hasten from it as the bird from the snare? When Israel is banished, said the Maggid, it is always because it has put the ban on itself, and only when Israel dissolves this self-imposed ban does it attain to salvation. When it overcomes the power of evil within itself, the demonic power of evil is broken, and instantly the rulers of earth also lose their power to subjugate Israel. Because Israel in Egypt was not willing to return from spiritual exile, Moses said to the Lord, Neither hast thou delivered thy people at all. This means, it is not you who can deliver them. But God replies, Now shalt thou see. And he, who is more powerful than all the powers, keeps the covenant. He casts his great light on the demonic power of Egypt and dazzles it. But the holy sparks which were banned into it awake. Each finds its kin. The sparks behold the primal light and flame toward it, until the demonic power cannot endure them any longer and is forced to drive them out. And the moment this happens above, it also happens below, in Israel and in Pharaoh. This is the significance of the plagues. The blessing. Rabbi Michal once said to his sons, My life was blessed in that I never needed anything until I had it. Love for enemies. Rabbi Michal gave this command to his sons, Pray for your enemies, that all may be well with them. And should you think this is not serving God, rest assured that more than all prayers, this is indeed the service of God. Willing. In the last 2 years before his death, Rabbi Michal fell into a trance of ecstasy time after time. On these occasions, he went back and forth in his room, his face aglow with inner light, and one could see that he was clinging to a higher life rather than to earthly existence, and that his soul had only to make one small step to pass into it. That is why his children were always careful to rouse him from his ecstasy at the right moment. Once, after the third Sabbath meal, which he always had with his sons, he went to the house of study as usual and sang songs of praise. Then he returned to his room and walked up and down. At that time, no one was with him. Suddenly, his daughter, who was passing his door, heard him repeat over and over, Willingly did Moses die. Willingly did Moses die. She was greatly troubled and called one of her brothers. When he entered, he found his father lying on the floor on his back and heard him whisper the last word of the confession, one, with his last breath. From world to world. Many years after Rabbi Michal's death, young Rabbi Zevi Hirsch of Zhaidachov saw him in a dream. The dead man said to him, Know that from the moment I died, I have been wandering from world to world, and the world which yesterday was spread over my head as heaven is today the earth under my feet, and the heaven of today is the earth of tomorrow. After he had gone into Bathsheba, to Rabbi Aaron Lieb of Primishlan, a disciple of the Maggid of Zlotchov, came a man on whose face he read signs of having committed adultery. When he had talked with his caller for a time, he said to him, It is written, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet came unto him, after he had gone in to Bathsheba. What can this mean? It means that Nathan chose the right way to move David to turn to God. Had he confronted him publicly and as his judge, he would only have hardened his heart. But he came to censure David in secrecy and love, just as David himself had gone in to Bathsheba. And then his censure went to the king's heart and melted and recast it, and from it mounted the song of one recast and turned to God. When Rabbi Aaron Lieb finished speaking, the man confessed his sin and turned wholly to God. Zev Wolf of Zaberaj. In the last hour, on a certain New Year's night, the Maggid of Zlochov saw a man who had been a reader in his city and who had died a short time ago. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "The rabbi knows," said the dead man, "that in this night souls are incarnated anew. I am such a soul." "And why were you sent out again?" asked the Maggid. "I led an impeccable life here on earth," the dead man told him. "And yet you are forced to live once more?" the Maggid went on to ask. "Before my death," said the man, "I thought over everything I had done and found that I had always acted in just the right way. Because of this, my heart swelled with satisfaction, and in the midst of this feeling, I died. So now they have sent me back into the world to atone for my pride." At that time, a son was born to the Maggid. His name was Rabbi Wolf. He was very humble. His tears. In his childhood, Rabbi Zev Wolf, the youngest of Rabbi Yehiel Michal's 5 sons, was a wild and self-willed boy. It was in vain that his father tried to curb him. When he was almost 13 years old and about to become a son of commandment, who would be responsible for himself and establish his own relation toward the will of God, the Tzaddik ordered the verses from the scriptures written for the phylacteries the boy was to wear from this time on. Then he bade the scribe bring him the 2 empty boxes together with the verses from the scriptures. The scribe brought them. Rabbi Michal took the boxes in his hand and looked at them for a long time. He bowed his head over them, and his tears flowed into them. Then he dried the boxes and put into them the verses from the scriptures. From the hour the boy Wolf put on the phylacteries for the first time, he grew tranquil and was filled with love. The servant. Rabbi Wolf's wife had a quarrel with her servant. She accused the girl of having broken a dish and wanted her to pay for the damage. The girl, on the other hand, denied having done what she was accused of and refused to replace the article. The quarrel became more and more heated. Finally, the wife of Rabbi Wolf decided to refer the matter to the court of arbitration of the Torah and quickly dressed for a visit to the Rav of the town. When Rabbi Wolf saw this, he too put on his Sabbath clothes. When his wife asked him why, he told her that he intended accompanying her. She objected to this on the grounds that this was not fitting for him, and that besides, she knew very well what to say to the court. "You know it very well," the Tzaddik replied. "But the poor orphan, your servant, in whose behalf I am coming, does not know it, and who except me is there to defend her cause?" The radish eater. At the 3rd meal on the Sabbath, an intimate and holy gathering, the Hasidim at Rabbi Wolf's table carried on their conversation in a low voice and with subdued gestures, so as not to disturb the Tzaddik, who was deep in thought. Now, it was Rabbi Wolf's wish and the rule in his house that anyone could come in at any time and seat himself at his table. On this occasion, too, a man entered and sat down with the rest, who made room for him, although they knew that he was an ill-bred person. After a time, he pulled a large radish out of his pocket, cut it into a number of pieces of convenient size, and began to eat with a great smacking of lips. His neighbors were unable to restrain their annoyance any longer. "You glutton," they said to him. "How dare you offend this festive board with your taproom manners?" Although they had tried to keep down their voices, the Tzaddik soon noticed what was going on. "I just feel like eating a really good radish," he said. "I wonder whether anyone here could get me one." In a sudden flood of happiness which swept away his embarrassment, the radish eater offered Rabbi Wolf a handful of the pieces he had cut. The coachman. On a freezing cold day, Rabbi Wolf drove to the celebration of a circumcision. When he had spent a little time in the room, he felt sorry for the coachman waiting outside, went to him and said, "Come in and get warm." "I cannot leave my horses alone," the man replied, moved his arms, and stamped his feet. "I'll take care of them until you get warm and can relieve me again," said Rabbi Wolf. At first, the coachman refused to consider such a thing, but after a while he allowed the rabbi to persuade him and went into the house. There, everyone who came, regardless of rank or whether or not he was known to the host, got all the food and drink he wanted. After the 10th glass, the coachman had forgotten who was taking his place with the horses and stayed hour after hour. In the meantime, people had missed the Tzaddik, but told themselves that he had had something important to attend to and would return when he was through. A good deal later, some of the guests left. When they came out on the street, where night was already falling, they saw Rabbi Wolf standing beside the carriage, moving his arms and stamping his feet. The horses. When Rabbi Wolf drove out in a carriage, he never permitted the whip to be used on the horses. You do not even have to shout at them, he instructed the coachman. You just have to know how to talk to them. It's depicted. The quarrelers. Rabbi Wolf saw no evil in any man and regarded all human beings as righteous. Once, when two persons were quarreling, and Rabbi Wolf was asked to side against the one who was guilty, he said, "According to me, one is as good as the other, and who would venture to come between two righteous men?" The gamblers. A Hasid complained to Rabbi Wolf that certain persons were turning night into day, playing cards. "That is good," said the Tzaddik. "Like all people, they want to serve God and don't know how. But now they are learning to stay awake and persist in doing something. When they have become perfect in this, all they need do is turn to God, and what excellent servants they will make for Him then." The thieves. One night, thieves entered Rabbi Wolf's house and took whatever they happened to find. From his room, the Tzaddik watched them, but did not do anything to stop them. When they were through, they took some utensils, and among them a jug from which a sick man had drunk that very evening. Rabbi Wolf ran after them. "My good people," he said, "whatever you have found here, I beg you to regard as gifts from me. I do not begrudge these things to you at all, but please be careful about that jug. The breath of a sick man is clinging to it, and you might catch his disease." From this time on, he said every evening before going to bed, "All my possessions are common property, so that in case thieves came again, they would not be guilty of theft." Renegades. A number of Tzaddikim met in Luau and discussed the corrupt ways of the new generation. There were many who were giving up the holy customs, wearing shorter robes, cutting their beards and the curls at their temples, and would soon backslide spiritually as well. They thought it imperative to do something to stop the stones from crumbling, or else on a day none too far off the entire lofty structure would be bound to collapse. And so those who had met to confer on this matter resolved to set up solid bounds and to make a beginning by forbidding renegades to appeal to the court of arbitration. But they agreed not to make this decision effective until they had the consent of Rabbi Wolf of Zabaraj. Several Tzaddikim reported to him the results of the meeting and made their request. "Do you think I love you more than them?" he asked. The decision was never put into effect. Assistance. While Rabbi Wolf was on a journey, a poor young Hasid came up to him and asked for financial assistance. The Tzaddik looked in his purse, put back a large coin he had happened to find, fetched out a smaller one and gave it to the needy young man. "A young man," he said, "should not have to be ashamed, but neither should he expect heaven knows what." The Hasid went from him with bowed head. Rabbi Wolf called him back and asked, "Young man, what was that you were just thinking?" "I have learned a new way to serve God," the other replied. "One should not be ashamed, and one should not expect heaven knows what." "That is what I meant," said the Tzaddik, and accorded him help. Mordecai of Neskish. What does it matter? Before Rabbi Mordecai of Neskish had recognized his vocation, he ran a small business. After every trip he took to sell his wares, he set aside a little money to buy himself a citron for the Feast of Tabernacles. When he had managed to collect a few rubles in this way, he drove to the city, and on the way there, thought only of whether it would be vouchsafed him to buy the finest of the citrons for sale. Suddenly he saw a water vendor standing in the middle of the road and lamenting his horse which had collapsed. He left his carriage and gave the man all the money he had to buy himself another. "What does it matter?" he said to himself as he turned to go back home. "Everybody will say the blessing over the citron. I shall say mine over this horse." But when he reached his house, he found a beautiful citron which friends, in the meantime, had brought him as a gift. With the Prince of the Torah, to those who came to him to share the Sabbath meal. Rabbi Mordecai rarely said words of teaching, and then only a very few. When one of his sons once ventured to ask him the reason for this restraint, he replied, "One must unite with the angel prince of the Torah in order to receive in one's heart the word of teaching. Only then does what one says enter the heart of one's hearers, so that each receives what he requires for his own particular needs." The promise. Rabbi Mordecai used to say, "Whoever has eaten of my Sabbath meal will not leave the world without having turned to God." At dawn. Once Rabbi Mordecai sat with his disciples all night until break of day. When he saw the light of dawn, he said, "We have not transgressed the bounds of day. Rather has day transgressed our bounds, and we need not cede to it." The Standard. Rabbi Mordecai of Neskij said to his son, the rabbi of Kovel, my son, he who does not feel the pains of a woman giving birth within a circuit of 50 miles, who does not suffer with her, and pray that her suffering may be assuaged, is not worthy to be called a Hasidic." His younger son Yitzhak, who later succeeded him in his work, was 10 years old at the time. He was present when this was said. When he was old, he told the story and added, "I listened well, but it was very long before I understood why he had said it in my presence." Why people go to the Tzedek. Rabbi Mordecai said, people go to the Tzedekим for many different reasons. One goes to the Tzedek to learn how to pray with fear and love. Another, to acquire strength to study the Torah for its own sake. Still another goes because he wants to mount to a higher rung of spiritual life, and so on. But none of these things should be the true purpose of going, for each of them can be attained, and then it is no longer necessary to toil for it. The true purpose should be to seek the reality of God. No bounds are set to this, and it has no end. The fish in the sea. Rabbi Yitzhak of Neskij told, "Once my father said to one of his friends in the month of Elul, 'Do you know what day this is? It is one of the days when the fish tremble in the ocean.' One of the men standing near Rabbi Yitzhak observed, 'People usually say when the fish tremble in the waters.' 'The way my father said it,' Rabbi Yitzhak replied, 'that is the only way it expresses the secret of what occurs between God and the souls.'" In 14. The offering. This is how Rabbi Mordecai of Neskij expounded the words in the scriptures. "And in your new moons ye shall present a burnt offering unto the Lord. If you want to renew your doing, offer up to God the first thought you have on awaking. God will help him who accomplishes this, to be bonded to him the whole day, and to bind everything to that first thought." Seeing and hearing. A rabbi came to the Tzaddik of Neskij and asked, "Is it true, what people say, that you hear and see all things?" "Think of the words of our sages," he replied, "a seeing eye and a hearing ear. Man has been so created that he can see and hear whatever he wants to. It is only a question of his not corrupting his eyes and his ears." The skull cap. It is told, a woman came to Rabbi Mordecai of Neskij and begged him with many tears to find out the whereabouts of her husband who had left her years ago and gone to a foreign country. "What makes you think I could help you?" said the Tzaddik. "Is he here? Is he perhaps in the water barrel over there?" Now, because her faith was great, the woman went to the water barrel and looked in. "There he is," she cried. "There he is, sitting in the water." "Has he a hat on?" asked the rabbi. "Only his skull cap." "Then, fetch it." The woman reached for it and drew it out. At the very same moment, her husband, who was carrying on his tailor's trade in a faraway land, was sitting at the window of the house of a lord for whom he happened to be sewing, when a storm wind rose and blew the cap off his head. The man shook in every limb. The core of his heart trembled, and he started on his way home. Lilith. They tell, a man of whom Lilith had taken possession traveled to Neskij, where he wanted to beg Rabbi Mordecai to free him. The rabbi divined that this man was on the way to him and gave orders throughout the city to have all doors closed at nightfall, and to admit no one. When the man reached the city at dusk, he could not find a lodging and had to lie down on some hay in a loft. Instantly, Lilith appeared and said, "Come down to me." He asked, "Why do you want to do that? Usually, it is you who come to me. In the hay on which you are lying," she replied, "is an herb which prevents me from coming near you." "Which is it?" he asked. "I shall throw it away, and then you will be able to come to me." He showed her one herb after another, until she said, "That's the one." Then he bound it to his breast and was free. The special thing. The rabbi of Lublin once asked the rabbi of Apt, who was a guest in his house, "Do you know the old rabbi of Neskij?" "I do not know him," he replied. "But tell me, what is there so special about him that you asked me this? The minute you made his acquaintance, you would know," said the rabbi of Lublin. "With him everything, teaching and prayers, eating and sleeping, is all in one piece, and he can elevate his soul to its origin." Then the rabbi of Apt decided to go to Neskij. His carriage was at the door, when he heard that he had been denounced to the authorities and found it necessary to go to the official magistrate of the district. By the time he returned, it was 2 weeks before Passover, and he again postponed his journey. After the holidays, he was told that the rabbi of Neskij had died in the week before Passover. From the circle of the Baal Shem Tov. 2 candle holders. For many years, Rabbi Moshe Hayim Ephraim, a grandson of the Baal Shem, and his wife lived in great poverty. On the Sabbath eve, she put the candles into a holder she herself had made out of clay. Later, they grew wealthy. One Sabbath eve, when the rabbi entered the room on his return from the house of prayer, he saw his wife looking at her wide-branched silver candelabra with joy and pride. "Now it all looks bright to you," he said, "but to me all looked bright in the days gone by." When the Sabbath was over, Rabbi Baruch, a grandson of the Baal Shem, told, "A Maggid, a prophetic spirit, used to appear to the Rav of Polnoi and teach him. But when the Rav attached himself to my grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, he took that Maggid from him and gave him another, one of the Maggidim of truth." Once Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz and I spent the Sabbath with the Rav of Polnoye. At the close of the Sabbath, a messenger arrived to ask Rabbi Pinhas to go home at once because of some urgent matter. The Rav had retired to a room he always went to when he wished to give himself up to meditation, but Rabbi Pinhas could not bear to go away without taking leave of him. So he begged me to tell the Rav of the message which had come, but I too hesitated. In the end, both of us went to the door and listened. Inadvertently, I touched the broken knob, and the door flew open. Rabbi Pinhas fled in fright, but I stayed, stood still, and did not turn my eyes away. Well, so be it. Rabbi Jacob Joseph, the Rav of Polnoye, was once invited to a circumcision which was to take place in a nearby village. When he arrived, one man was still lacking to make up the quorum of 10. The Zaddik was very much annoyed that he was forced to wait. Waiting always displeased him. A heavy rain had been falling since early morning, and so they could not get hold of a passerby for quite a while. At last, they saw a beggar coming down the street. When they asked him to attend the ceremony as the 10th man, he said, "So be it," and entered. When they offered him warm tea, he said, "So be it." After the circumcision, they invited him to the meal, and he gave the same reply. Finally, his host asked him, "Why do you always say the same thing?" The man answered, "For it is written, 'Happy is the people with whom it is so.'" And with that, he vanished before the eyes of all. That night the Rav could not sleep. Over and over he heard the beggar say, "So be it," until it became manifest to him that it could have been none but Elijah who had come to reprove him for his tendency to grow annoyed. "Happy is the people that is in such a case," he whispered, and instantly fell asleep. The book. The son of the rabbi of Ostrog told, when the Rav of Polnoye's book, The Genealogies of Jacob Joseph, appeared in print, and my father got hold of it, he kept reading and rereading it, especially passages which begin, "This I heard from my teacher." He read until he knew them by heart. This went on for a year, or even longer. Once, when he was again reading one of these passages, he realized that he did not understand it fully after all. He had the horses harnessed and drove to Polnoi. I was a boy at that time, and he took me with him. He found Rabbi Jacob Joseph ill and wretched. He was lying in his bed, which was soon after to be his deathbed. The Rav asked my father why he had come. When he was told the reason, he held the book in his arms and spoke in a voice full of strength, and his face was all spirit and flame. Before my very eyes, his bed rose up from the ground. At market, it is told, Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, wandered about all the days of his life and never stayed in one place for any length of time. He often stopped in woods and caves, but he also came to cities, and there secretly associated with certain intimate friends of his. He also never failed to appear wherever a large market was held. On such occasions, he rented a booth and stood in it from the beginning to the end of the market. Over and over, his disciples begged him to tell them the purpose of this strange habit. Finally, he yielded to their importunities. A man with a heavy load on his shoulders was just passing by. Rabbi Leib called him and whispered in his ear for a while. Then he told his disciples to follow the man and observe him. They saw him go up to one of the merchants, set down his load, and heard him say that he did not want to be a servant any longer. The merchant shouted angrily at him and refused to pay him his due wages, but the man went silently away. Then the disciples who were following him saw that he was wearing a shroud. They ran up to him and adjured him to reveal his secret to them. Hasty and transitory was my sojourn in the world of chaos, he said to them. I did not know that I have been dead long since. Now the rabbi told me and has given me redemption. To expound Torah and to be Torah. This is what Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, used to say about those rabbis who expound the Torah. What does it amount to that they expound the Torah? A man should see to it that all his actions are a Torah, and that he himself becomes so entirely a Torah that one can learn from his habits and his motions and his motionless clinging to God that he has become like heaven itself, of which it is said, there is no speech, there are no words, neither is their voice heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. The Father and the Little Children. Rabbi Aryeh of Spola, called the Spola grandfather, had in his youth known the Baal Shem. One Passover, before the Seder, he had his little son recite the mnemotechnical sentence in which the ritual actions are enumerated. When the boy was asked to explain the meaning of the word Kadesh, sanctify, he gave the customary response. When the father returns from the house of prayer, he should at once say Kiddush, that is, say the benediction over the wine. And there he stopped. The father asked him, why do you not add why he should at once say Kiddush? My teacher did not tell me anything more, said the boy. So his father taught him to add the words, so that the little children may not fall asleep, but ask the question they are supposed to. Why is this night different from all other nights? The next day, when the children's teacher was a guest at the Seder, the rabbi asked him why he did not teach the children to follow the word Kadesh by giving the reason for saying Kadesh. Since this was the traditional sequence, the teacher replied that he had regarded this as superfluous, because the rule did not hold only for those fathers who had little children in the house. That is a grave error on your part, said the rabbi. You are altering an old custom, whose significance you have not plumbed. This is what it signifies. When the father returns from the house of prayer, that is, when our father has seen and heard how everyone in Israel, no matter how tired he may be from the preparations for the Passover, said the evening prayer full of fervor, and when he now returns to his heaven, he should at once say Kiddush. He should at once renew the holy marriage contracted when he said to Israel, and I will betroth thee unto me forever, and redeem us in this very night, the night of watching, so that the little children, the people of Israel, may not fall into the deep sleep of despair, but receive a motive for asking their Father in heaven. Why is the night of this exile different from all other nights? When the rabbi had said these words, he wept, raised his hands to heaven, and cried, "Father, Father, lead us from our exile, while that which is written still holds for us. I sleep, but my earth waketh. Let us not fall utterly asleep." All wept with him. But after a while, he roused himself and cried, "Now let us delight our Father and show him that his children can dance, even though they are in darkness." He gave orders to play a merry tune and began to dance. The Grandfather's Dance. When the Spola grandfather danced on a Sabbath and on feast days, his feet were as light as those of a 4-year-old, and not a single one of those who saw his holy dance failed to turn to God at that very instant and with his whole soul, for he stirred the hearts of all who beheld him, to both tears and ecstasy. Once Rabbi Shalom Shachna, the son of Abraham the angel, was his guest on a Friday evening. They had just made peace with each other after waging a long dispute. Rabbi Shalom sat there as always on the night of the Sabbath, wholly surrendered to his clinging to God. The grandfather looked around joyfully, as always, and both were silent. But when they had finished eating, Rabbi Ari Leib said, "Son of the angel, can you dance?" "I cannot dance," Rabbi Shalom replied. Rabbi Aryeh Leib rose. "Then watch the Spola grandfather dance," he said. His heart immediately lifted his feet, and he danced around the table. When he had moved once this way and once that, Rabbi Shalom jumped up. "Did you see how the old man can dance?" he called to the Hasidim who had accompanied him. He remained standing and kept his eyes fixed on the feet of the dancer. Later he said to his Hasidim, "You may believe me. He has made all his limbs so pure and so holy that with every step he takes, his feet accomplish holy unifications." Purim Games. At the Purim festival, the Spola grandfather was in the habit of organizing a special kind of games. He had a number of Hasidim, carefully chosen and directed by him, disguise themselves, one as the king of Purim, the rest as his princes and counselors. These sat together in solemn session, in council, or in judgment, had discussions, and made resolutions and decisions. Sometimes the grandfather himself took part in the masquerade. The Hasidim tell that these games had a powerful effect which traveled through space, that they said it not doom, or the threat of doom, decreed for Israel. Leah and Rachel. In the days when young Nahum, later the rabbi of Chernobyl, was privileged to live near the Baal Shem, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer undertook one of his usual journeys. Nahum, who wanted very much to go too, kept walking around the waiting carriage. When the Baal Shem got in, he said to him, "If you can tell me the difference between that sequence of prayer in the Lamentations at midnight, which bears Leah's name, and that which bears Rachel's, you may come with me." Nahum replied, without hesitation, "What Leah affects with her tears, Rachel affects with her joy." The Baal Shem at once asked him to get into the carriage. The Tzaddik and his Hasidim. Rabbi Yitzhak of Skvira, a grandson of Rabbi Nahum's, told, "In a small town not far from Chernobyl, several Hasidim of my grandfathers were seated together at the conclusion of the Sabbath. They were all honest and devout men, and at this meal of the escort of the queen, they were casting the accounts of their souls. They were so humble and so full of the fear of God that they thought they had sinned very greatly, and agreed that there was no hope for them, and that their only consolation was that they were utterly devoted to the great Tzaddik Rabbi Nahum, and that he would uplift and redeem them. Then they decided that they must immediately go to their teacher. They started out right after the meal, and together they went to Chernobyl. But at the end of that same Sabbath, my grandfather was sitting in his house and casting the accounts of his soul. Then in his humility and fear of God, it seemed to him that he had sinned very greatly, and that there was no hope for him except one, that those Hasidim, so earnest in the service of God, were so deeply devoted to him, and that they would now comfort him. He went to the door and gazed in the direction his disciples lived, and when he had stood there a while, he saw them coming. At this instant, so Rabbi Yitzhak ended his story, 2 arcs fused to a ring. Words of comfort. Several disciples of Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl came to him and wept and complained that they had fallen prey to darkness and depression and could not lift up their heads either in the teachings or in prayer. The Tzaddik saw the state of their hearts and that they sincerely yearned for the nearness of the living God. He said to them, "My dear sons, do not be distressed at this seeming death which has come upon you. For everything that is in the world is also in man. And just as on New Year's Day life ceases on all the stars and they sink into a deep sleep, in which they are strengthened, and from which they awake with a new power of shining, so those men who truly desire to come close to God must pass through the state of cessation of spiritual life, and the falling is for the sake of the rising. As it is written that the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and from his sleep he arose, a whole man." The quality of God. A Lithuanian once came to Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl and complained that he had no money to marry off his daughter. The Tzaddik just happened to have 50 gulden put aside for another purpose. He let the poor man have the money and also gave him his silk robe, so that he might cut a fine figure at the wedding. The man took everything, went straight to an inn, and began to drink vodka. Some hours later, Hasidim went to the inn and found him lying on the bench, thoroughly drunk. They took the rest of the money and the silk robe away from him, brought it all back to Rabbi Nahum, and told him how his confidence had been abused. But the rabbi cried out angrily, "I just caught hold of the tail end of this quality of God's. He is good and beneficent to the wicked and to the good, and you want to snatch it from my hands. Take everything back at once." The rider and the hen. It is told, in the course of a journey, Rabbi Nahum was a guest in the house of another Tzaddik. They had a hen killed in his honor and served it at the meal. He looked at it for a while and said, "In this fowl, I can see an armed man on horseback." They called the ritual slaughterer, and he confessed that at the moment of slaughtering, he had been startled by an armed officer who came riding by, and that from then on, he had thought of nothing but that. Fire against fire. It is told, once, when the Baal Shem was on a journey and stopped at the house of one of his disciples, Rabbi David Likes, a government order was proclaimed to the effect that on a certain day, at noon, the Talmud was to be burned wherever a volume was found. On the morning of that day, Rabbi David hid his Talmud under the wash tub. At 12 o'clock, the bells began to chime. Pale as death, he came into the room and saw his teacher calmly walking up and down. "With your fire," said the Baal Shem, "you have put out their fire." The order was rescinded. The rope dancer. Once Rabbi Chaim of Krosno, a disciple of the Baal Shems, was watching a rope dancer together with his disciples. He was so absorbed in the spectacle that they asked him what it was that riveted his gaze to this foolish performance. "This man," he said, "is risking his life, and I cannot say why. But I am quite sure that while he is walking the rope, he is not thinking of the fact that he is earning 100 gulden by what he is doing. For if he did, he would fall." Menahem, Mendel of Vitebsk. His childhood. From the time he was 11 years old, Menahem studied in the house of the great Maggid and was dear to him. One Sabbath, after the midday meal, the Maggid saw him walking up and down the room with a mischievous expression, his cap a-tilt on his head. He went to the threshold, put his hand on the doorknob and asked, "How many pages of the Gemara did you learn today?" "6, said the boy. "If," said the Maggid, "after 6 pages, the cap slides to the edge, how many pages do you think are necessary to make it fall off?" Then he closed the door. Menahem beat against it and said in tears, "Open, Rabbi, and tell me what I must do." The Maggid opened the door. "I shall take you to my teacher, the holy Baal Shem," he said. They arrived in Mezbish on a Friday. The Maggid at once went to the house of Baal Shem Tov. Menahem dressed himself and combed his hair with the greatest care, for this was a habit of his, and remained so to his dying day. In the house of prayer, the Baal Shem Tov stood in front of the desk and waited with praying until the boy came. but he did not summon Menahem to him until after the conclusion of the Sabbath. The Maggid and Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polnoye, the other great disciple of the Baal Shem, stood in front of their master. He called the boy, looked at him for a long time, and then told him a story about oxen and a plow. His listeners soon realized that it was a parable foretelling the life of Menahem, but the boy understood just so much of it as he had experienced up to this time. The rabbi of Polnoy understood half, and the Maggid all. Later, the Baal Shem Tov said to the Maggid, "This mischievous boy is full of reverence through and through." More. On New Year's Day, the great Maggid did not blow the ram's horn himself. This was the office of his disciple, Rabbi Menahem Mendel, and the Maggid called out what he was to blow. In the last period of his life, when he could no longer walk about on his sore feet, he did this from his room. Once Rabbi Menahem Mendel was absent, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was to take his place. He put the ram's horn to his lips, but when the Maggid called out the first blast, Levi Yitzchak saw a dazzling light and fainted away. "What is the matter with him?" asked the Maggid. "Mendel sees much more, and still he is not afraid." Pursued by honors. The Maggid of Mezrich once sent his disciple Rabbi Menahem on a journey to various communities. He was to speak in public and waken desire to study the Torah for its own sake. In one of the towns he visited, a number of learned men came to see Rabbi Mendel at his inn and showered him with special honors. While talking to them, he brought up the question why it is said that when a man flees from honors, honors pursue him. If it is good and seemly to be honored, he said, why is he who flees from honors rewarded for his unseemly fears by having honors pursue him? But if it is wrong to be honored, why should this pursuit punish him for praiseworthy flight? The fact is that the honest man should avoid honors, but just like everybody else, he is born with a desire for them and must fight against it. Only after a long time, during which he has studied the Torah zealously and for its own sake, will he succeed in overcoming that reprehensible desire and no longer feel satisfaction at being called rabbi or the like. But the desire for honor which he had in his youth and which he has conquered still clings in the very bottom of his soul, and though he knows that now he is free, it pursues him like a tenacious memory and confuses him. That is the taint of the primeval serpent, and of this too he must cleanse himself. The worm. Rabbi Mendel said, I do not know wherein I could be better than the worm, for see, he does the will of his maker and destroys nothing. Vocation. Several Hasidim from White Russia came to the great Maggid and complained that the distance to Mezrich was so great they could not come as often as they needed to, and in the intervals they were without a teacher and guide. The Maggid gave them his belt and his staff and said, Take this to the man called Mendel in the city of Vitebsk. On their arrival in Vitebsk, they inquired for a Rabbi Mendel in every street and alley, but they were told that there was no rabbi by that name. A woman who had been watching them asked whom they were looking for. Rabbi Mendel, they replied. We haven't a rabbi by that name, she said, but we certainly have more than enough Mendels. My own son-in-law's name is Mendele. Then the Hasidim knew that this was the man they had been sent to find. They followed the woman to her house and gave her son-in-law the belt and staff. He clasped the belt around him and closed his hand over the knob of the staff. They looked at him and scarcely recognized him. Another man stood before them, a man garbed in the power of God, and the fear of God lifted their hearts. The document. The document through which the congregation of Minsk invested Rabbi Mendel with the office of preacher began with the address, To the Holy Zadok, the Aloof and Holy Light, and so forth. It was signed by more than 100 prominent persons. When Rabbi Mendel had it in hand and read all the encomia and honorary titles, he said, This would be a fine document to take with one into the world of truth. But when they question me, I shall have to tell the truth anyway. And the confession of the accused weighs more than the words of 100 witnesses. So what will all this praise avail me? Seasons. Once Rabbi Menahem fell seriously ill and could not speak. His Hasidim surrounded his bed and wept. He rallied his strength and whispered, "Do not be afraid. From the story which the holy Baal Shem once told me, I know that I shall go to the land of Israel." Before going on his journey to the land of Israel, Rabbi Menahem visited the rabbi of Polnoi, who asked him, "Do you remember the story of the oxen and the plow?" "I remember," he replied. "And do you know," the rabbi of Polnoi continued, "what point in it you have reached in your life?" With a little sigh, Rabbi Menahem said, "I've reeled off the greater half of it." The heap of cinders. Before leaving for the land of Israel, Rabbi Menahem Mendel paid a visit to old Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polnoi, the great disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. He arrived at the inn in a troika, and this in itself was enough to annoy the Hasidim in Polnoi, whose master insisted on a simple life. But when Rabbi Mendel left the inn and went to the Zaddik's house, hatless and beltless, a long pipe in his mouth, they all thought that Rabbi Jacob Joseph, who was known for his violent temper, would refuse to receive his guest because of this careless and lax behavior. But the old man welcomed him on the threshold with a great show of love and spent several hours talking to him. When Rabbi Mendel had gone, the disciples asked their master, "What is there to this man who had the impudence to enter your house with only the cap on his head, with silver buckles on his shoes, and a long pipe in his mouth?" The Zaddik said, "A king who went to war hid his treasures in a safe place, but he buried his most precious pearl, which he loved with all his heart, in a heap of cinders, because he knew that no one would look for it there. And so that the powers of evil might not touch it, Rabbi Mendel buries his great humility in the cinder heap of vanity." A comparison. Rabbi Israel of Rizhin said, "Rabbi Mendel's journey to the Holy Land was like the journey of our father Abraham. Its purpose was to pave the way for God and Israel." For Azazel, when someone asked Rabbi Israel of Rizhin why he did not go to the land of Israel, he said, "What has a rough fellow like myself to do in the land of Israel?" Now Rabbi Mendel of Vitebsk had something to do with the land of Israel, and the land of Israel with him. And he went on to tell, before Rabbi Mendel set out for the land of Israel, he invited the officers of the king to dinner in the city of Vitebsk, and they brought their wives with them, as is their custom. Rabbi Mendel had posted several of his young Hasidim near the gate, so that they might help the guests, both men and women, from their carriages, a courtesy which officers of the king expect. And he promised the young men that not a shadow of desire should graze their hearts when they lifted those lovely women from the coach. And so it is. If you want to go to the land of Israel, you must first concentrate your soul on the secret of the goat, which is sent into the wilderness for Azazel. That is what Rabbi Mendel meant with that dinner of his. He could do it. But I, who am such a rough fellow if I came to the land of Israel, they would ask me, "Why have you come without your Jews?" At the window. While Rabbi Menahem was living in the land of Israel, a foolish man climbed the Mount of Olives unobserved. When he got to the top, he blew the ram's horn. The people were startled, and soon a rumor sprang up that this was the blowing of the ram's horn, which was to precede redemption. When this was reported to Rabbi Menahem, he opened his window, looked out into the world, and said, "This is no renewal." The air of that land. Rabbi Menahem used to say, "It is true that the air of the land of Israel makes a man wise. Before I was in that land, all my thoughts and desires were intent on saying a prayer, just once, in exactly the right way. But since I am in this land, all I want is just once to say amen in the right way." Another thing he said was, "This is what I attained in the land of Israel. When I see a bundle of straw lying in the street, it seems to me a sign of the presence of God, that it lies there lengthwise and not crosswise." The signature. When Rabbi Menahem wrote letters from the land of Israel, he always signed himself, "He who is truly humble." The rabbi of Rizhin once was asked, if Rabbi Menahem were really humble, how could he call himself so? He was so humble. said the rabbi of Rizhin, that just because humility dwelt within him, he no longer regarded it as a virtue. The ride to the Leipzig fair. Among the Hasidim who went to the land of Israel with Rabbi Menahem Mendel was a wise man who had been a great merchant and had become so attached to the Tzaddik that he gave up his business in order to accompany him to the Holy Land. When after a time it became necessary to send a reliable messenger to the Hasidim who had stayed at home to ask them for financial assistance, this man was entrusted with the errand. But while he was on the ship, he suddenly fell ill and died. No one in the land of Israel knew about it. But after his death, he himself felt as if he were riding in a carriage bound for the fair in Leipzig and talking to an old servant he used to take with him on such trips, and also to the coachman who looked very familiar. And all the while he had a great longing for his teacher. The desire to see him grew stronger and stronger until he decided to turn back and go to him. When he told his two companions of his resolve, they argued vehemently against it. It would be foolish to give up the important business transaction in hand for a mere whim. But he insisted on having his way in the face of all their objections. Finally, they told him that he was dead and that they were evil angels to whom he had been entrusted. Instantly, he summoned them before the court of heaven, and they could not refuse. The verdict was that the angels were to take him to Rabbi Mendel. When he reached the city of Tiberias and entered the Zadok's house, one of the angels went in with him in his true and terrible form. The rabbi was startled at the sight of the angel, but bade him wait until he had finished his work. For a whole week he wrought at the soul of the man until it was in the right shape. This is the story that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov told his Hasidim. All the candles. The Hasidim who studied in the class of the rabbi of Lubavitch, the son-in-law of Rabbi Shneur Zalman's son, used to light a candle before everyone who sat over his books in the house of study. But when they had finished their evening work and began to tell one another stories about the Tzaddikim, they put out all the candles except one, which they left burning. Once, when they were seated around the one burning candle, the rabbi came into the room to fetch a book. He asked them whom they were talking about. Rabbi Mendel of Vitebsk, they said. In his honor, he told them, you must light all the candles, for when he expounded the teachings, all feeling of self was blotted from his heart, and the other side had no way of getting at him. And so, when you talk about him, you must light all the candles as if you were studying the Holy Torah.